Sometimes one person's life can trigger a chain of irreversible events that end up destroying entire families. The line between sorrow and hatred is often so thin that once you cross it, there's no going back. In a small village, when the quiet hides a storm of human emotions, unseen threads of jealousy, betrayal, and revenge can tie people up, pushing them to act in the dark. This story is about how intense emotions can tear apart not only lives, but even the closest relationships. The question is, who's ready to pay the price for unbearable grief, and what will it cost those left behind? The cry of a baby shattered the silence of the night as a man, drenched in sweat from fear, rushed up to the second floor of his house. He had no idea what was waiting for him, but his heart was pounding. In the bedroom, he was met with a horrifying scene. His wife, Maiva, was lying face down on the floor, covered in blood. Next to her, under her arm, was their son, crying uncontrollably. The man was frozen with terror and confusion. What could have happened? Just a few hours earlier, everything seemed normal. His shift at the restaurant had ended late. It was a wedding party, and he'd already told his wife he'd be home later than usual. They had been texting back and forth all evening, but around midnight, Maiva's messages stopped. He figured she had just fallen asleep, exhausted. There was nothing to worry about. The house was quiet when he got home at 12:49 a.m., and although the door was unlocked, he didn't think much of it. The only unusual thing was the silence and the TV being off. And now, standing in front of this terrifying scene, he couldn't make sense of it. Maybe she had fallen and hurt herself? He dialed 911, unsure of what to do. The operator gave him instructions on how to perform CPR, and he started giving his wife chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth. But as he worked, it slowly dawned on him that she was already gone. The paramedics arrived around 3 a.m. and officially declared her dead. Their son was unharmed, but what exactly caused Maiva's death was still a mystery. The investigators who arrived at the young family's home couldn't have predicted the grim reality of what had happened. Blood spattered across the walls, and even the ceiling pointed to a brutal struggle, but they quickly realized this wasn't just a typical case of domestic violence or an accidental fall. The woman's skull was almost completely crushed, and her body showed signs of multiple blows. Bruises on her hands and back indicated that she had fought hard to protect herself and her son during the attack. By around 2:48 a.m., emergency responders were already on the scene, but by then, it was clear. This was a cold-blooded murder. The medical examiner later confirmed the brutality of the attack. She had been hit with extreme violence, but there was no evidence of sexual assault. And although at first it seemed like it could have been a robbery, that theory fell apart when Maiva's purse, along with her personal belongings and money, was found the next morning near a pond close to the restaurant. All the evidence pointed to Maiva being the target. The only question left was, who could commit such a vicious crime? The police started digging into the family's past. At first glance, Maiva and her husband Alain seemed to have a peaceful life. They had known each other since childhood, grew up in the same village, and went to the same school. Their life appeared to be full of happiness. Soon after their wedding, they found out they were expecting a child, and their son Lorenzo was born a year later. The family moved into a small house, and Maiva had plans to open a nail salon. They had even picked out a bigger house for the business, but just 3 weeks before the move, everything changed. Maiva's death was so unexpected that her loved ones couldn't believe it. And even though their life seemed perfect on the surface, the investigation uncovered dark secrets within the family. It turned out that Alain was involved in illegal activities related to drug dealing. He had run-ins with the law, and while Maiva was aware of this, she was strongly against his involvement in anything like that. After Alain's arrest, she even turned down an offer to buy a car for 100,000 euros. earned through his shady operations, saying she didn't want dirty money. Her frustration extended to all of Alain's friends who came by for business deals. Maïva wouldn't let him meet with them, which annoyed some of his acquaintances. Some of these people, including old school friends, weren't happy with Maïva's interference, which led to conflicts. Maïva's relatives believed these connections might have led to her murder. They thought Alain owed someone a large sum of money, and the crime was meant to send a message. However, Alain insisted that no one in his circle would be capable of such a crime. He immediately told the police about all his contacts and business dealings, assuring them he had no outstanding debts or serious conflicts. Moreover, the police quickly ruled out the possibility of a criminal dispute. The house where Maïva was killed was in perfect order. Nothing had been stolen except for that one purse, and as it turned out, nothing had been taken from it either. But the investigation took a new turn. The police discovered that 6 months before the crime, Maïva and her husband had been receiving threats from an elderly couple in a neighboring village. The threats stemmed from a conflict involving Maïva's father's best friend. Investigators started tracking down where this couple was on the night of the murder. The small village was shocked as the horrifying details of the crime came to light. No one could believe that the man who regularly visited Maïva's father and supported him through tough times turned out to be guilty. It all began with 2 witnesses who noticed strange behavior that night, and their testimony was the key to cracking the case. The first witness, a young doctor, was out for a late-night walk with his baby in a stroller when he saw a man wearing pink rubber gloves. The man was clearly trying to avoid being seen, and when he noticed the doctor, he quickly turned away. The doctor remembered his odd behavior and even recalled part of the license plate number from the car he saw nearby. The second witness, who was driving home with his wife, also recognized this man. He reported seeing Rue Berrois slowly driving down the street, carefully looking around. It seemed suspicious, so the man decided to alert the police. The investigators didn't waste any time. They tapped the Berrois family's phone. This move paid off. During one conversation, Rue Berrois' wife, Enda, unintentionally gave her husband away. She was talking to a friend, telling her how that night her husband had come home with Maïva's purse, the same one that went missing on the day of the crime. He showed it to her and coldly said, "See, I did it." The police immediately arrested the couple, and soon after, Rue Berrois confessed. Rue Berrois had lost his son, Rudolph, a few months before, and he couldn't cope with the grief. On that fateful night, he first had dinner at a friend's house and then went to the cemetery to tend to his son's grave. He took the gloves and shoes he usually used for cemetery work. After leaving the grave, he was overcome with rage. He got into his car and drove to Alain and Maïva's house. With a baseball bat that he always kept in his car, he easily got into the house. The door wasn't locked. When Rue went up to the second floor where Maïva and her son were sleeping, Maïva woke up. She recognized him right away, but before she could say or do anything, Rue hit her multiple times with the bat. He later reenacted the entire crime during a police investigation. After the murder, he grabbed Maïva's purse, walked out of the house, and went home. Once there, he showed the purse to his wife and then got rid of it. The next day, he burned the baseball bat in the fireplace. When the villagers found out that Rue Berrois was the killer, their shock was beyond words. They couldn't believe that the man who had been supporting Maïva's father, asking about the police investigation, and constantly inquiring about any new findings, was the same person who committed the crime. He even asked if they had found her purse or discovered any clues at the crime scene. So why did Berrois commit such a brutal act? It all tied back to his son, Rudolph. 8 months before the murder, on August 21, 2011, Rudolph was in a car accident while speeding toward Alain and Maïva's house to have it out with them. On the way, he lost control of the car, skidded off the road, and died just minutes after the crash. Rue blamed Alain and Maiva for his son's death, and his anger grew by the day. Every morning, Enda Beroy, Rue's wife, would light candles at an altar dedicated to her son. Their house was filled with photos of Rudolph, surrounded by somber symbols of loss, and quiet conversations with his spirit became part of her daily routine. She was convinced that his death wasn't just a tragic accident, and she searched for answers every day. On the night Rudolph died in the crash, something shifted in her mind. Her heart was consumed with hatred and a thirst for revenge. Since then, Enda couldn't stay calm. She didn't believe the official story, nor did she trust the investigators or the forensic experts who said her son had simply lost control of the car. The fact that Rudolph's body was found outside the car and the seatbelt marks didn't match his position in the vehicle made her think that someone else had been driving. Nothing could convince her that Rudolph died by accident. Despite all the forensic reports, including DNA tests and phone records, Enda was certain her son was murdered. She collected evidence, took photos of anything related to the tragedy, and was determined to find the person responsible. Even months after the accident, she made her husband drill a hole into Rudolph's grave, hoping to record his voice with a tape recorder and get answers from the other side. But gradually, her hatred became focused on two people, Alain and Maiva. In Enda's mind, she formed a dark theory that they were responsible for her son's death. Her hatred for Maiva grew even stronger as more details about their relationship came to light. Many years ago, when Maiva and Rudolph were teenagers, they dated, and to everyone else, it seemed like a typical teenage romance. But for Maiva, he was her first real love. She was deeply in love with Rudolph in her younger years, but over time, she realized he wasn't the kind of person she could build a life with. His cheating and constant drama ruined their relationship, and by 2009, Maiva decided to end things with him. She found comfort and support in Alain, who soon became her fiancé. However, Rudolph couldn't handle the fact that Maiva had moved on. Even after she got pregnant, he wouldn't leave her alone. Maiva told her mom that one time Rudolph tried to kiss her on a bridge, but she pushed him away. Soon after, Maiva gave birth, but that didn't stop Rudolph. His obsessive behavior continued, and he kept texting her, begging to start over. Seeing that Rudolph wouldn't back off, Alain decided to step in. He met with Rudolph and warned him that he wouldn't tolerate the harassment any longer, but even after that, Rudolph kept sending messages. So Alain took those messages and showed them to Crystal, Rudolph's girlfriend at the time. That ended their relationship. Crystal broke up with Rudolph after finding out he was still obsessed with his ex. This loss pushed Rudolph over the edge. On that fateful night, he got drunk at a bar and, grabbing a hammer, decided to drive over to Alain's house. He was determined to confront him. People at the bar saw him and felt like something bad was about to happen. When police cars and ambulances sped by shortly after, many already guessed what had gone down. Rudolph never made it to Alain's house. His car veered off the road at a curve, and he died at the scene, despite the paramedics' attempts to save him. His death was a shock to everyone, but it hit his mother the hardest. From that moment on, she dedicated her life to finding someone to blame. Enda blamed Maiva for her son's death. She would show up at her house and threaten her, saying that Maiva would pay for her son being in the grave. Scared, Maiva filed a police report detailing how Rudolph's mother had threatened to kill her. This report was supposed to ease the tension, but it only made things worse. Every day, Enda told her husband that Maiva was to blame for their loss and that he needed to do something about it. In the end, Ruberwa started to believe that it was his destiny to avenge his son's death. 2 months before the tragedy, he showed up at Maiva and Alain's house with threats and accusations. Staring down at Maiva, he said she was responsible for his son Rudolph's death and that he wouldn't stop until he got his revenge. He mentioned his connections and money, adding insults that only escalated the tension in the family. This warning was a dark omen of the horror that would unfold later. 8 months after Rudolph's death, Beroy moved from words to actions. He broke into Alain and Maiva's home when she was the only one there, asleep next to their young son, Lorenzo. In that fatal moment, she found herself trapped, face to face with a man consumed by rage, which had completely overtaken his ability to think clearly. This uncontrollable fury ended in a horrific outcome. Investigators were still working to determine what role his wife, Enda Beroy, had played in the crime. Though Enda claimed she had nothing to do with the murder, she was involved in its aftermath. When Rue came home after what he'd done, she told him to get rid of Maiva's purse, the one piece of evidence that could have shed light on what happened that night. In her testimony, Enda denied knowing about her husband's plans. She said he had completely lost his mind and acted on his own. She insisted to investigators that she had never asked him to do anything and didn't know he had committed the crime because of her. Still, despite her claims, suspicions of her involvement lingered. Her behavior during the trial spoke volumes. Enda seemed more concerned about her own fate, nervously glancing at the lawyers, reporters, and judges. She was more worried about the possibility of getting a 3-year prison sentence than the fact that her husband was facing life behind bars. On the witness stand, she showed no remorse for what had happened, focusing only on avoiding jail time herself. During the trial, Rue Beroy didn't admit to planning the murder in advance. The issue of whether his wife had provoked him never came up in court, but many believed Enda played a part in the crime. She had manipulated her husband, constantly pressuring him to believe that he needed to act, something he might never have done on his own. Even in the courtroom, she cast cold, controlling glances at him, as if still trying to direct his testimony. In the end, Rue Beroy was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murder of Maiva. His wife, Enda, received a 2-year sentence for ordering the destruction of Maiva's purse, a key piece of evidence. Maiva's relatives felt the punishment was too light, especially for Enda, whom they saw as the manipulator who pushed her husband to commit the crime. However, neither Rue nor Enda appealed the sentences. After Maiva's death, their son Lorenzo was left alone. At first, he was cared for by a child psychologist to help him cope with the loss of his mother. Eventually, Lorenzo went to live with other relatives, and his life slowly began to stabilize. There's little known about what happened to Alain. What remains in the hearts of those who knew Maiva are the photos and videos of a woman whose life was brutally cut short by hatred and revenge aimed at her family. This story is a powerful example of how hate, grief, and the inability to cope with loss can destroy not just one life, but entire families. The tragedy began with the death of Rudolph, who was a victim of his own recklessness, but for his parents, it was an unbearable loss. Enda Beroy's obsession with revenge led to even greater harm, as she manipulated her husband, feeding off his pain, and ultimately drove him to commit a horrific crime. Maiva and her son Lorenzo became innocent victims of destructive emotions that no one could control. While Rue Beroy was responsible for his actions, he was driven by guilt and hatred, skillfully fueled by his wife. This tragedy highlights how important it is to manage grief before it turns into a desire for revenge. In the end, neither revenge nor punishment brought peace to anyone involved in this drama. One family lost a daughter, mother, and wife, while another lost a son. It's a heartbreaking and painful story. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. The case of Nancy Paola Reyes Gorses. What led to the crime against the pregnant woman, and what became of the child? The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries or even the other side of the world in these pursuits. But sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gores has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of two left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. However, the woman never returned home. Fragments of her disfigured and unrecognizable body were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone Gores had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala, little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gores. She was born on April 13, 1991, in a small village named Granados in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia Gores, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children and did not provide any financial support. Decision to relocate. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. The family barely had enough money for essentials, and something had to change. In 2013, Nancy's older sister emigrated to the United States, where she soon found a good job, married successfully, and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, Gores worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few €1,000, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities, and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. a fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andres Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Gores was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and, at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's 2 younger brothers had also moved to Spain, with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the end of June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which she tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being supported by a woman. Most alarmingly, he abused alcohol and occasionally indulged in forbidden substances, although he constantly tearfully promised to quit and find a stable job. Gores was openly doubting whether to continue her life with this man when she discovered she was pregnant. Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on, their life would change for the better, but in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device onto a chair and walked away. The next day, the situation repeated itself. Carlos again grabbed the phone from Nancy's hands while she was talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Gores ominously stated that if anything happened to her, or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice. Mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th, around 2 p.m, Nancy sent a text message to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos's phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real, so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report, and on top of everything else, he too stopped communicating with the Gores family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos wasn't answering her calls, but only sent brief messages, asking her not to ask questions and to give him some time. She liked Nancy, but knew her son too well and understood what he was capable of. The next day, Sandra was called in for questioning at the police station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts of Carlos. She shared with the officers what she had already told the girl's brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. In the message, Nancy pleaded with Sandra never to give her son money, regardless of the tearful stories he might concoct. According to Gores, he would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances, under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now, before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation, but later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships. The oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning, but in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially he was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother, he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries. In a rented apartment, for nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch, but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor, who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim discoveries in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing, but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with what happened, stating they had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos's version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos's movements from August 20th to the 26th, using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, so once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gores, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements, and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen, where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park, looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorses, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated, brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of 150,000 euros to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman. Fatal love from the past. Kindness has the power not only to save the world, but also to destroy the one who brings it to others. The natural desire to help everyone, to protect, to guard, to save, and to prevent harm often leads to tragedy. It is important to recognize which people should not be helped, and even more so, to avoid covering for them in the hope that they will realize their mistake and change. The story of Cecilia Hadad is a vivid example of how believing in the best and the desire to protect someone once dear can first poison and then take a life. She feared harming her former lover in any way, but he had no fear in dealing with her and fleeing to the other side of the world, hoping justice wouldn't reach him there. An unidentified body in the river. On an early spring morning, Sunday, April 29, 2018, a man fishing on Lane Cove River, a northern tributary of the Parramatta River in Sydney, Australia, came upon a horrific scene. Floating downstream, face down, was something resembling a human body. The elderly fisherman couldn't believe his eyes at first and even thought it was a mistake, but within minutes, all doubts vanished. It was the body of a young woman with long dark hair. The man immediately reported the incident to the police, and soon, a few dozen feet downstream, the lifeless body of a young woman showing signs of violent death was pulled from the river. She had no identification or mobile phone on her, so investigators were tasked with identifying the deceased and determining the circumstances of the tragedy. The version that the incident was an accident was dismissed during the initial examination of the remains. The body was still fresh, having spent less than a day in the water. Clear strangulation marks were visible on her neck, and there were defensive wounds on her hands, indicating that the victim had fought desperately when she was attacked. The victim was dressed in a t-shirt and wide pants with many large pockets, which were stuffed with stones. It was obvious that the criminal had hoped the body, weighed down by the extra load, would sink and not be discovered anytime soon. However, some of the stones likely fell out since the pockets had no fasteners, allowing the body to simply float downstream. A toxicology report revealed no traces of alcohol, prohibited substances, or strong drugs in the victim's system. There were also no signs of intimate violence on the body. As initially suspected, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled with bare hands. The victim appeared to be around 35 to 40 years old, so the police immediately checked reports of missing women within this age range. By the afternoon, they had identified the deceased after relatives reported the disappearance of 38-year-old Cecilia Hadad, who had suddenly stopped responding on April 28th and missed an important work meeting. A glance at Cecilia's photo convinced detectives that it was her body that had been pulled from the river, and relatives arriving for identification confirmed the fact. But who could have so cruelly dealt with a young woman and successful entrepreneur known for her active charity work? However, the name of the main suspect was almost immediately identified, but by that time, he was already on another continent. Who was Cecilia Hadad? Cecilia Bruna Hadad was born in the fall of 1979 in the bustling metropolis of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She grew up in a close-knit, middle-class family where her parents did everything they could to provide their many children with a good education and all the necessities. From a young age, Cecilia was very smart, responsible, and goal-oriented. She became one of the best students in her school and dreamed of continuing her education at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Additionally, Cecilia had a kind heart. She couldn't ignore someone else's misfortune and always tried to help within her abilities. Those around her described her as a compassionate, caring, and generous young woman, always ready to lend a hand. After finishing school, Hadad became a student at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, one of Brazil's leading private universities. There, she earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering. After receiving her diploma, Cecilia successfully passed an interview at a major mining company, where she was eagerly hired. Almost immediately, her career took off, and within a year, she became a leading specialist. In 2007, at the age of 27, the Brazilian woman decided to dramatically change her life and moved to Australia after receiving an enticing job offer. Cecilia fully understood the challenges she would face being in a foreign country, far from her loved ones and friends, but she decided to take the risk. Cecilia was fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, her native languages, but had to learn English almost from scratch, a task she handled successfully and quickly. Hadad took a managerial position at one of Australia's largest mining companies and quickly fit in with the team. The sweet, sociable, and friendly woman made many friends and began actively engaging in charity work and volunteering, helping people and homeless animals. Alongside this, she developed a new hobby, hiking and skiing in the mountains. In 2016, Cecilia founded her own consulting company, which supported and guided people looking to start their own businesses. Her clients included both native Australians and immigrants who had come to the country in search of a better life, just as she had once done. Personal life. Working at the aforementioned major Australian industrial company, Cecilia earned a good salary and could afford whatever she wanted. When she started her own business, she was able to bring her younger brother and sister from Brazil, helping them find jobs and supporting them financially at first. Overall, things were going well for Cecilia. She traveled, earned a second higher education, and lived life to the fullest. However, in terms of her personal life, Hadad was far less fortunate. Back in her student days, in her hometown of Rio de Janeiro, she entered into a romantic relationship with Mario Marcelo Santoro, a man 7 years her senior and her complete opposite. The young man was lazy, unambitious, and didn't aspire to much, but Cecilia loved him, always trying to help and motivate him toward success. In the end, when Cecilia received a job offer from Australia, Mario refused to go with her, fearing the challenges they would face in a new country. However, the young woman wasn't about to give up on her dream, one she had worked so hard for, and after prolonged but fruitless persuasion, she left alone. In the mid-2000s, while working in Sydney, Cecilia began an office romance with one of her colleagues. This relationship led to marriage, but the union was short-lived, lasting less than 3 years. The couple didn't have children, and they parted ways amicably, without hard feelings or resentment. They even maintained a friendly relationship afterward. A blast from the past. In 2016, shortly after her divorce, Cecilia decided to fly home to visit her parents and old friends. By that time, she had already left her job and was successfully growing her own business. She looked fantastic, enthusiastically talked about her life in Australia, and eagerly made plans for the future. On the third day of her stay, Hadad unexpectedly ran into Mario, whom she hadn't seen in 9 years since she emigrated to Australia. The man was shocked by the success his former girlfriend had achieved, while he himself was barely making ends meet. This chance encounter turned out to be fateful for Cecilia, who suddenly realized that she still had tender feelings for her ex-boyfriend. For the next few days, the two spent time walking around their favorite places where they had once been happy. After Cecilia returned to Sydney, they continued to talk and text every day. Within a month, Cecilia bought Mario a plane ticket and essentially brought him to live with her, deciding he was the man she would be happy with for the rest of her life. The couple settled in Cecilia's spacious apartment in an elite residential complex, and for a time, she fully supported her beloved. Later, using her connections, she helped him secure a good position with a high salary and actively encouraged his career growth. Hadad was once again in love, just like in her youth, and failed to notice that her partner was simply taking advantage of the situation. Toxic relationship. Shortly after the couple moved in together, their relationship began to deteriorate. The man became jealous, domineering, and tried to control every aspect of Cecilia's life. However, independent and strong-willed, Cecilia refused to be manipulated. On top of that, Mario started meddling in her business, wanting a share since he didn't like working for someone else. The couple frequently argued, but Hadad always tried to resolve conflicts, seeking compromises and making every effort to save the relationship. Yet, her partner was simply draining her emotionally, monitoring her actions, taking her phone and work laptop without permission, and trying to limit her social circle. Cecilia endured this situation for almost a year, but finally decided to have an honest conversation and informed Mario of her intention to break up. This news infuriated him. He started yelling and insulting Cecilia, and when she tried to calm him down, he struck her across the face. He had been physically aggressive before, pushing her or grabbing her arms hard enough to leave bruises. But this was the first time he had hit her. This was the last straw, and Hadad simply showed him the door. At first, Santoro tried to beg for her forgiveness. He sent her touching messages, apologized, and sent flowers and gifts. But Cecilia remained firm. Realizing he couldn't fix things, the man changed tactics, resorting to threats and intimidation. From that point on, he began stalking his ex-girlfriend, turning her life into a nightmare. Obsessed stalker. After the breakup, Mario rented an apartment in a complex just 10 minutes away from Cecilia's home. He called her daily, sent dozens of messages, and constantly tried to meet her, waiting at her front door. Cecilia still tried to reason with him, hoping to resolve the conflict peacefully, and believed that her ex would calm down. In January 2018, late in the evening, Santoro showed up at Hadad's apartment again. At first, she didn't want to let him in, but he was persistent and forced his way inside. He attacked the petite woman, but she miraculously managed to escape and barricade herself in another room. While the stalker tried to break down the door, she pleaded with him to stop, think, and leave. Eventually, Cecilia threatened to call the police, and only then did Mario calm down and leave her home. Cecilia didn't report the incident to law enforcement, nor did she mention that Mario had been stalking her for months and threatening her. She knew that his visa had expired, and that if he came to the authorities' attention, he would be deported back to Brazil immediately. Cecilia pitied the man she once loved, knowing that back home he would return to his worthless life. Despite this, Hadad understood that staying in her apartment was no longer safe, so she temporarily moved in with her sister Carol and then spent about a month living with a close friend named Rita. Both women urged Cecilia to file a police report, sensing that this situation could end in tragedy, but she was still afraid of harming her tormentor. She hoped that he would realize the error of his ways, calm down, and leave her alone. Most importantly, she didn't believe that her ex-boyfriend was capable of causing her any serious physical harm. When Cecilia returned to her apartment in early April 2018, She realized that Mario had been there several times in her absence. She was horrified to discover that he had a spare set of keys, which he had initially returned after the breakup, but took back when he forced his way in during the night. Neighbors also confirmed that they had seen Santoro near the complex multiple times, and even going up to the floor where Hadad's apartment was located. When they reasonably suggested she go to the police, Cecilia again refused, assuring them she would handle the situation herself. She planned to change the locks, but decided to live incognito for the time being, not drawing attention to herself, to see if her stalker would leave her alone. For over 2 weeks, Cecilia acted as though she wasn't home. She didn't turn on the lights, tried to stay quiet, and only came and went when she was sure Mario wasn't around. At the slightest suspicion, she would spend the night at her sister's or a friend's. The stress almost caused her to have a breakdown, but then, suddenly, everything changed in an instant. Strange goodbye. On April 25th, 2018, Mario unexpectedly called Cecilia and, in a calm voice, said that he had realized everything and would no longer bother her. He also apologized and informed her that he had bought tickets for a flight to Rio de Janeiro. He planned to leave early in the morning on April 28th and asked if she would meet him one last time to say goodbye. Hadad agreed, but said she would meet him directly at the airport, where they could see each other and talk. After this call, it was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her stalker and tormentor had decided to leave on his own, and she believed he would no longer disturb her. Overjoyed, she called her sister and told her everything. But Carol was not as thrilled and suspected something was off. She begged Cecilia not to meet with Mario, but Cecilia dismissed her concerns, assuring her that everything would be fine and that nothing could happen to her at the airport. Cecilia was excited at the thought that her nightmare was finally ending and that she could start a new life. Sadly, that miracle did not happen. Mysterious disappearance. On Saturday, April 28th, Cecilia was supposed to arrive at Sydney International Airport by 7 a.m. to see her ex-boyfriend off and say a final goodbye. Afterward, she had an important work meeting scheduled and another in the afternoon. The night before, Cecilia had one last call with her sister, telling her about her plans. Carol again tried to dissuade her from meeting her ex, but Cecilia was adamant. She insisted that she needed to see for herself that Mario boarded the plane and would no longer bother her. The two sisters talked for about an hour, and Cecilia promised to call as soon as he left. However, the next day, instead of a call, a rather strange message arrived from Hadad. She said she was heading to the mountains for a couple of days because she needed to reflect on everything that had happened and clear her head. Carol tried to call her, but the phone was already turned off. Soon, it became clear that similar messages had been sent to several of Cecilia's friends and colleagues, and she had not shown up for any of her scheduled meetings, which was completely out of character for her. That evening, Cecilia's family and friends reported her missing to the police, providing the name and details of the potential suspect. At that time, they still hoped she was alive, but by the next morning, all hope was shattered when her sister was called to identify her body. Investigation and evidence search. On April 29th, the police combed the riverbank upstream, searching for clues or evidence. They found a discarded pair of men's shoes soaked through in the grass. Detectives speculated that the criminal didn't want to leave tracks and decided to dispose of the shoes. In the victim's apartment, dried footprints left by wet socks were found. But why did he return to the victim's apartment after dealing with her? Since Mario didn't own a car, he used the vehicle of the woman he had deprived of life to dispose of her body. Sand, fragments of coastal vegetation, and puddles of river water were found inside the car. Additionally, numerous fingerprints belonging to the suspect were discovered. Moreover, almost all of Santoro's movements were tracked through his cell phone signal, and he was caught on several street surveillance cameras. It was determined that Mario took a taxi to the airport. Authorities quickly located the driver, who agreed to speak with them. The driver claimed the passenger was calm, but asked for a significant detour to pass over a small bridge crossing a river away from the bustling city roads. There, he asked to stop, got out, and threw a bag into the water, as well as something resembling a set of keys. He then returned to the car and they continued the journey. The driver took the police to that very bridge. Divers were called to the scene and spent hours searching the riverbed for evidence. Fortunately, the current in that spot was weak, so they soon found the mysterious bag, followed by the set of keys. Inside the bag were the victim's cell phone, work laptop, some documents, a wallet, and personal items. It was clear the suspect was trying to create the illusion that the woman had left town, so people would believe she had indeed gone to the mountains. He also disposed of all duplicate keys to make it harder to access the apartment. By the time Cecilia's body was pulled from the river, the perpetrator had already landed in Rio de Janeiro, convinced that he would never be caught and would escape punishment. Retrieving a criminal on another continent is indeed a challenge, but with no doubt left about his involvement in the crime, Interpol was called in. The manhunt expanded internationally, drawing significant media attention. Search and arrest of the suspect. Only after Australian police gathered and presented irrefutable evidence linking the Brazilian citizen to the brutal crime was Mario officially declared wanted in his home country. He was finally apprehended on July 7, 2018, at a friend's apartment, where he had been staying the entire time. Santoro didn't resist arrest, but immediately requested a lawyer. During the initial interrogations, he denied his guilt, but soon, under the weight of overwhelming evidence, he began confessing. However, even as he admitted to the crime, he desperately tried to blame the victim. Mario claimed that it wasn't him, but his former girlfriend, who had been stalking him after their breakup and wouldn't let him live in peace. He said he decided to leave the country just to escape her, but Cecilia allegedly stole his passport to prevent him from leaving. That morning, according to him, he went to her apartment to retrieve his document without which he couldn't board the plane, but she refused to return it. A struggle ensued, and he accidentally ended her life. The accused claimed he tried to resuscitate Hadad, performing CPR and chest compressions. However, when he realized she was gone, he panicked and attempted to cover his tracks by disposing of her body and the evidence. His best idea, he said, was to dump everything in the river. Reconstructing the timeline of events. Reconstructing the timeline of that tragic day was a painstaking process since Mario constantly changed his testimony and tried to confuse the investigation to minimize his guilt. He played on sympathy, even attempting to cry, but no one believed his version of events. The victim's family, friends, and colleagues all testified against Santoro as they had witnessed how he had made Cecilia's life a nightmare. According to the investigation, by the time Mario purchased his plane tickets, he had already decided to take the life of his former girlfriend and was meticulously planning the details. On Saturday, April 28th, around 5:30 a.m., he arrived at Cecilia's building and rang the intercom. Cecilia wasn't expecting him and thought they would meet at the airport. Feeling uneasy, she didn't want to let him in. A few minutes later, the man opened the door using a spare key he had and climbed the stairs to Cecilia's apartment. It's likely she let him in because otherwise the neighbors would have heard some noise, but they reported hearing nothing unusual. Mario immediately attacked Cecilia, strangling her and not giving her a chance to scream or call for help. She fought back desperately, as evidenced by the bruises and hematomas on her arms, but she was overpowered. After ending her life, he wrapped the body in a blanket, took the keys to her car, and quietly made his way to the parking lot while all the residents were still asleep. He drove to a secluded spot by the river, filled her pants pockets with rocks, and submerged her body in the water, hoping it wouldn't be discovered anytime soon. During this process, the suspect soaked his shoes, and decided to discard them to avoid leaving any traces, as he planned to return to her apartment. Around 7 a.m., Mario returned to Cecilia's building using her car. He went back up to her apartment and quickly gathered some of her belongings, including documents and her laptop, to simulate her departure. He also sent text messages from her phone to family members and several friends, pretending she had suddenly gone on a trip to the mountains. He later put the phone in the same bag, which he threw from the bridge into the river. After completing this, Mario walked back to his own apartment where his suitcase was already packed. He showered, changed his clothes, and soaked the ones he had been wearing in bleach to destroy any potential evidence, then called a taxi to the airport. On the way, he asked the driver to make a detour to dispose of Cecilia's belongings, and within an hour, he calmly boarded a plane, convinced he would never be held accountable for his actions. The trial and verdict. Since the accused was a Brazilian citizen, he could not be extradited to another continent to stand trial for the crime he committed. However, the countries managed to reach an agreement and resolve legal differences to ensure the trial would be as fair as possible, although the suspect would serve his sentence in his home country. The bureaucratic hurdles and investigation process took some time, and the trial didn't begin until June 2023. Delegates from Australia, who had been directly involved in the investigation, traveled to Rio de Janeiro to participate in the trial. Throughout the proceedings, the defendant tried to evoke pity from the judges, crying and claiming to feel remorse, insisting he didn't understand how things had gone so wrong. On July 1, 2023, Mario Santoro was found guilty of premeditated crime, as well as tampering with evidence and attempting to mislead the investigation. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The convicted man and his lawyers repeatedly tried to appeal the sentence, but the court upheld its decision. Today, we will visit Dallas, a modern city with a cosmopolitan spirit and southern charm. It is widely known for its skyscrapers, upscale shopping, restaurants, and rich cultural life. There are many historic districts, such as the West End with its late 19th century buildings and futuristic landmarks, shimmering glass towers and skyscraper spires that serve as the city's main landmarks. Dallas is a city where modern metropolitan life is infused with natural beauty. There are more than 30 parks in different parts of the city. The Gable Park residential complex is located at the epicenter of Dallas chic. Living here itself offers a vibrant, exclusive lifestyle and exquisite, unique experiences. The high-rise building is elegant in appearance, has a parking garage and concierge. It is a vibrant and luxurious apartment building with a landscaped saltwater pool, fitness studio, and gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas. It's a quiet and safe place with no crowds of tourists or neighborhood residents strolling by. On September 2, 2015, at 07:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked, and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashem Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called the emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born February 3, 1980 to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced and her mother married Bruce Jamieson. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, Melissa Jameson, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Pleasant Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in 2010, She moved to Dallas, where she began working at Smilezona Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christy and faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values, interests, and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young men were already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and put forward the version of robbery, as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery version to the background. One bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when it was possible to obtain CCTV footage and reconstruct a picture of what happened. The footage shows a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulling into the parking lot at 07:15 p.m. Half an hour later, Kendra returns home and drives into the same garage. A few minutes later, a man approaches her, shoots her, and runs to the side, after which he jumps in and black Jeep on the move. The videos were of poor quality and the crime scene itself was not visible on them. It was impossible to identify the assailants, but the vehicle was put on a wanted list. It was decided to place the camera footage, images of the Jeep and the driver in the media. The authorities appealed to the public for help, and it helped. Police were contacted by a man named Jose Luis Ortiz. He reported that the car in the footage belonged to him. But Jose wasn't involved in the shooting and he wasn't driving it. When questioned, Jose explained that on the morning of September 2nd, he was approached by two of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez. They asked Jose to repair their car and, in return, to lend them his Jeep until the evening. The man agreed. He also said that later that evening, Brenda called Jose to a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Crystal Cortez later that evening drove the Jeep to Jose's house, so the man was quite surprised when his Jeep made the news. When Jose saw his Jeep on the TV program, he asked Brenda about it. She first said that it was a different Jeep on the screen. Then Brenda explained that Crystal had been traveling somewhere on her business and she didn't know about it. Brenda Delgado suggested that Jose not tell anyone anything and to simply repaint the Jeep. She was willing to pay to paint the Jeep. Jose was awaiting a decision on his U.S. citizenship and did not want any trouble with the police. He realized that Brenda had set him up. So Jose went to the police again and testified again. So the police tracked all the movements of the Jeep that day and found the two young women whose names Jose had given them. Brenda Delgado was the first person investigators called in for questioning. The woman told police that she never knew Kendra Hatcher and had never seen her before. When asked where she was on September 2nd at 07:42 p.m., Brenda stated her alibi, because she was at Chili's restaurant with Jose. Brenda even provided receipts for the dinner. But how often, and more importantly, what do you keep dinner receipts for? So gradually, assembled in minute detail, the truth that the participants in the crime tried to hide was revealed. The central figure in the investigation was Brenda Delgado. She was born into a fairly simple family, Luis and Maria Delgado, who immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father was a factory worker. They found a home in a low-income neighborhood in southeast Dallas. It was then that Luis found a job in construction, and his wife worked at the U.S. Post Office cleaning houses. Brenda was their second child and their only girl. Not only was she an excellent student who was loved by her teachers, but she also worked part-time at a flower store and as a waitress. Brenda was very ambitious and dreamed of going to medical school someday. But the sad reality was that her parents couldn't afford the expensive tuition. So after graduating from Skyline High School in 2000, she continued to live with her parents, only dreaming of an affluent and beautiful life. On the way to her goal, Brenda worked hard. She was a dental assistant, and alongside that, she worked at a day spa in North Park Center where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, Brenda met Ricardo Paniagua and fell in love with him. Their first date was at a Jennifer Lopez concert and was like her dream date. In November 2012, 3 months after they met, Brenda moved in with Ricardo at his home in Fitzhugh Urban Flats. The man was also charmed by Brenda so much that he even met her parents. In 2013, she uploaded a post in honor of his birthday on Facebook where she wrote words of congratulations. "Happy birthday to the most amazing and smartest man I know." Ricky, together we have shared so much happiness. You are my best friend. I love you with all my heart and can't imagine life without you. Brenda then found out she was pregnant, but at Ricardo's insistence, she terminated the pregnancy, which left her heartbroken. A little recovered from the decision, Brenda decides to devote herself to her career and her beloved Ricky. In the fall of the same year, she enrolled in Sanford. At first glance, it seemed that Brenda had gotten over the emotional blow of the breakup. However, this was not the case. Brenda's painful dependence on Ricardo only gained momentum. And when Ricky posted a joint photo on social media with his new lover Kendra, who looked like a photo model, Brenda was up to something terrible. Many who knew her testified that Brenda dreamed of getting rid of Kendra. After obtaining information about Brenda and her personal life, investigators were able to surmise that the offended woman had a motive to get rid of her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend. They dated intermittently from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky and Kendra met. Ricardo was confident that he and Brenda remained friends and saw no problems between Brenda and Kendra. After all, he had been on dates with other women before meeting Kendra. And why would it be meeting Kendra that would turn Brenda's mind? However, the picture of the reconstructed events confirmed how insidious and cruel an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado thought she had devised the perfect plan to win back her former lover and rid him of the superfluous figure, Kendra Hatcher. At first, she established communication with Ricardo, pretending to be his best friend, provided all kinds of support, was interested in how he and Kendra are progressing in their relationship. Secretly, she knew everything about their plans for the future, and Ricardo believed that this is a sincere interest. But it's a shame that men know women so poorly and sometimes blindly trust them. After Ricardo learned that Kendra had died, he shared his grief with Brenda via text message, and she supported her friend in every way possible and offered to do anything for him. Ricky had no way of guessing his ex's true motives. As it turned out, Brenda had been playing her own game for months. She had opened Ricardo's mail and knew about all his plans with Kendra, even where and when they had booked tickets. All of this was infuriating to Brenda. She longed to be rid of Kendra Hatcher, truly believing that she had taken her place. Brenda transferred Ricardo's account to her phone and kept tabs on him. Following Ricky and Kendra practically became her raison d'etre. Brenda became completely dependent on the stalking. She quit her job and devoted all her time to realizing her goals. Over time, a cruel and terrifying plan was born in Brenda's mind: to kill the hated Kendra and take her place beside her lover. For its realization, Brenda addressed to many of her acquaintances with an offer for money to harm Kendra Hatcher. Thus, through mutual acquaintances, she found a single-mother 21-year-old Crystal Cortez, who, because of the big financial problems, just for $500 was ready to help her. At Brenda's behest, Crystal found the perpetrator, a man named Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Crystal handed Christopher $500 from Brenda, as well as 2 types of illegal substances. Several 2 women followed Kendra to learn her habits and daily schedule, to further select the location and time of the crime. On September 2, 2015, they took Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher Love waited for Kendra in the parking lot. They did not pursue her on her way home from work because they were afraid of falling behind her in traffic. In the evening, the criminals completed their devious plan and were rewarded for a job well done. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were apprehended. The suspects denied their guilt and their presence at the scene of the crime. However, the situation changed when Love was found to have the gun that killed Kendra in the side compartment of the car. Crystal, on the other hand, was nervous and constantly confused in her testimony, telling different stories about the reasons for the appearance of the SUV in different parts of the city. So, at the first interrogation, Crystal admitted that she was the woman who was driving in the parking lot, but she arrived there at the will of an armed carjacker who got into the SUV and forced her into the parking lot that evening. She, wishing to remain innocent, gave false testimony, saying that her son was in the car with her. But this information was later not confirmed because no child was recorded on the cameras. As the interrogation continued and more evidence became available, Crystal changed her testimony and wanted to make a deal with the investigation. She agreed to testify and testify against Brenda in exchange for less time. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead and the crime was her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting with Brenda, they began planning the crime. The police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricardo was over. She was obsessed and desperate to win him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy to be his loyal friend, but her life began to fall apart. She began to resent Kendra, believing that she had taken her place. According to Crystal, it was at this point that Brenda decided that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. The perfect crime plan emerged in Brenda Delgado's mind. In testimony, Crystal detailed how Brenda devised the perfect crime. Enlisting each other's support, Brenda and Crystal began to formulate a plan to kill Kendra. They met many times and developed many plans. The original plan was to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then get rid of her. But to avoid being under suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around the scraggliest neighborhoods and asked a few people if they could help. That's how they met Christopher Love. He agreed to help and took an active part in deciding the modus operandi of the crime. The trio unanimously decided that the best way to kill was to shoot him because it was quick. While cooperating, Crystal revealed that the date of September 2nd was not chosen at random. Brenda knew that Kendra and Ricardo were planning a trip to Mexico, so it was decided to get rid of the woman before the happy vacation. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the crime to look like a botched robbery. Next, the criminals chose the location of the massacre. For days, they desperately tracked Kendra's movements and recorded her minute by minute to make sure nothing changed on the appointed day. After work, they traced her route home and figured out how to discreetly enter the apartment complex's secure parking garage. On September 1st, 2015, they made a final check. On the day of the crime, early in the morning, Brenda and Crystal picked up the Jeep from Jose, then picked up Christopher along the way. Brenda was dropped off at the library in Carrollton so she would have an alibi, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex. They waited across the street for about 30 minutes, then drove to Kendra's place of employment. After waiting for their victim, they followed her but lost her in traffic, however. They returned to the house first and waited there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves, approached Kendra with a gun, and shot her when she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she did not actually see the shooting but heard it. Crystal then drove Christopher home, picked up her son from his grandmother on the way, and later met Brenda at Jose's house where she handed him the Jeep. Thus, Brenda's dream came true. She was rid of her hated rival, and all she had to do was wait for her beloved Ricardo's message. Brenda was happy that she had managed to pull off the perfect crime. Crystal's candid confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about Brenda Delgado's guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. But when police officers arrived with the warrant, she was no longer at home. Having dual citizenship, Brenda Delgado fled to Mexico. After fleeing, Brenda's involvement in a contract killing became apparent, and she was put on a wanted list. On April 6, 2016, the FBI placed her on the list of most wanted fugitives, assigning a reward of $100,000 for information about her. So Brenda Delgado became the only woman on the list at the time and the 9th woman on the list ever. But just 2 days later, in Torreon, Coahuila, she was apprehended by Mexican authorities and extradited to the United States on October 6th. Mexico agreed to extradite Brenda, but only on the grounds that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Brenda was extradited to Texas, and she was brought to trial. Hearings in the case began in 2017. The grief-stricken relatives of Kendra and Ricardo did not hesitate to express themselves during the court appearance. The oil was added to the fire by witnesses who confirmed Brenda's intentions and her dangerous obsession with her former lover. Brenda's cousin, Moses Martinez, spoke in court about his sister's depression after the end of her and Ricky's relationship. He also revealed that Brenda offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He refused to do so. Brenda's friend, Jennifer Escobar, testified at trial that Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo and read all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer revealed that Brenda had asked her to help eliminate the hated Kendra Hatcher too. She also told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something lethal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. For her help, Brenda offered to give her $2,000, a car, and illegal drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then refused. It is quite strange that adults, having been offered the suggestion to harm or kill someone, contemplated doing so, and none of them went to the police to report a threat to a person's life or health. The court heard evidence about obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda. So the court found that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, and she wanted only one thing: to get back to Ricky. The court received corroboration that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda became increasingly obsessed. As evidence of Brenda's involvement, an ATM withdrawal receipt in the amount of $500, which she subsequently gave to Crystal for doing the work, was presented at the hearing. Christopher Love received a cash payment in the amount of $600. The cell phone data provided also indicated that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together prior to the crime. More than 99 calls were recorded between Brenda and Crystal between August 22 and September 4th, proving their constant communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. The defendant's attorney tried to shift much of the blame to the perpetrators, but it didn't work. The defense argued that Brenda was not at the scene of the crime. She had an alibi and receipts confirming her presence at the restaurant at the time of the crime. Brenda herself did not plead guilty, but the jury thought otherwise. It took them only 30 minutes to find Brenda Delgado guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Christopher Love, the direct perpetrator of the crime, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death via injection. Crystal Cortez, in exchange for cooperating with the investigation and pleading guilty, received a sentence of 35 years in prison with parole eligibility. The family of Kendra Hatcher was satisfied with the court's decision and silently withdrew from the courtroom after the verdict. The Delgado family did not believe to the last that their Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving daughter and woman, healthy and with good family and Christian values. I hope this cautionary tale of female perfidy and mentally unhealthy obsessive love will leave a mark on every woman's soul and serve as a cautionary tale in new love relationships, for no man is worth a human life. Take care of yourself and be careful. Why do terrible things happen to good girls? Because bad boys attract them like moths to a flame. Timed, often naive, they idealize their partner, and they blatantly ignore the glaring red flags. Sometimes these destructive relationships last a long time, and other times the realization comes quicker. Sooner or later there comes a choice: leave or continue to get burned, until the moth burns to ashes. The incident that will be discussed entered the history of Austin, Texas, USA as one of the most heinous and probably exceedingly didactic. Jennifer was nowhere to be seen. Late on the evening of August 16, 2005, Jennifer Cave, the new girlfriend of Michael Rodriguez, was last in touch. Throughout the night, Michael waited for her call. However, exhausted from work, he unwittingly fell asleep. By morning, there were no missed calls from her. Concerned, Michael remembered Jennifer had promised to call him back once she had dropped off her friend Colton at home. He was uneasy about the fact that she had to go out of her way because Colton didn't arrange his own ride home, and generally he didn't trust Colton and his lifestyle. Meanwhile, Jennifer's roommate, with whom she lived, found Jennifer not at home. Her alarm clock was blaring, but there was no one to turn it off. It seemed Jennifer hadn't spent the night at home. Her friend became worried. They usually informed each other of their plans. She tried calling Jennifer. There was no response, which was uncharacteristic of her. Jennifer has her first day of work today. It's unlikely she would go without changing, the roommate thought. Jennifer's office clothes were neatly hanging on the rack, appearing untouched as if she hadn't taken anything with her. On August 17th at 8:30 a.m., the director of the law firm was notified of the new employee's tardiness. During her internship, Miss Cave had made a positive impression. It was odd that she would allow herself such behavior on her first day of work. By 9 a.m., colleagues called Jennifer, but she didn't answer. Around 11 a.m., the employer sent one of the managers to check on her at home. Persistent knocking went unanswered. They then tried to reach out to the secondary contact number listed on her resume. Sharon Sedgwick, Jennifer's mother, answered the call. She was surprised and seemingly disappointed by the call. She said she would try to locate her daughter. Sharon also couldn't reach Jennifer. Growing worried, suspicion crept into her mind. Apparently she's dropped everything again for that irresponsible young man, she concluded. No one in Jennifer's circle liked her ex-boyfriend, Colton Petoniak. Despite his intellect and financial status, he always seemed to drag her down. Mrs. Sedgwick called Colton. He said he hadn't seen her daughter for some time. It seemed he wasn't concerned that Jennifer was missing. For some reason, her mother didn't believe him. More than 12 hours passed with no news. After all hospitals in Austin were checked to no avail, Sharon called the police. She reported her daughter missing and expressed concern that she might be in danger at Petoniak's house. Following the call to law enforcement, Sharon, along with her husband Jim Sedgwick, went to Colton's place to speak with him personally. However, he didn't open the door for them or the responding officers, claiming he had no desire to talk and they had no search warrant. He knew his rights well, so the police had to leave. However, the situation was suspicious. Jennifer's car was found near Petoniak's house. Although the car was empty, its presence in the parking lot was thought-provoking. It appeared Jennifer was indeed inside the house. Sharon and Jim were certain something had happened to her. The police decided not to waste time and inspected Jennifer's house. However, they found nothing of interest. The only leads were information from Michael and Sharon, as well as Jennifer's car near Colton's house. Michael recounted how Jennifer went out to meet with friends on the evening of August 16th to celebrate getting a job. She had called him several times. Among the friends was her ex-boyfriend Colton, who was with her at the time of the call. During the conversation, Jennifer didn't seem scared or worried, but mentioned that Colton was acting strangely, so she needed to take him home. After that, contact with her was lost. A grisly discovery. All clues led to Petoniak's residence. While the police were hesitating, Sharon and Jim decided to take matters into their own hands. They drove to Colton's place again. Upon arriving at the apartment complex, they knocked on the door, but no one answered. Sensing something was terribly wrong, the girls' parents decided to call a locksmith to open the lock. However, Jim found a better way. One of the apartment windows was open, and he decided to enter through it. Inside, everything was scattered around. It was clear that no one had maintained order in the house, and the apartment itself resembled more of a den. The man was hit by a putrid smell that immediately triggered his gag reflex. Covering his mouth with his hand, Jim moved toward where the smell was even stronger. The house was empty. Looking into the bathroom, Jennifer's stepfather noticed clutter. Upon closer inspection, he saw a dismembered female body. The head and limbs had been severed. Nearby lay trash bags and a sports bag. Horrified, Jim began to examine their contents. Inside were the remaining parts of the body. The legs of the deceased were covered with freckles, just like his stepdaughter's. However, the corpse was so mutilated that it was impossible to definitively identify who it was. The man hoped, until the last moment, that it was not his stepdaughter. After regaining consciousness, he called the emergency services. Jennifer's life. Jennifer Cave was born in March 1984 near Bishop, Texas. Her family lived in a modest farmhouse. Sharon, her mother, was in her second marriage, which brought 3 more children into the family: Jennifer herself, Lauren, and Clayton. Vanessa, from Sharon's first marriage, was the oldest sibling. Charlie, Jennifer's father, worked as a welder. He was a decent husband and father until alcohol turned him into someone mean and unbearable, hurling insults and causing trouble. When sober, he was calm and respectable. Despite the unstable home environment, the family remained close-knit. Sharon worked as an accountant at a chemical plant, while also taking care of the home and children. Unlike her more sociable brother and sister, Jennifer was shy. While they easily made friends and played outside, she preferred the company of books, which sharpened her intellect and gifted her with an excellent memory. Her passion for reading affected her eyesight, requiring her to wear glasses. Just like the braces in her mouth, the glasses didn't help her self-esteem. Confidence was not characteristic of our heroine, but that didn't stop her from actively participating in school's social and athletic activities. Eventually, Her father's destructive habit led to the family's breakup. After the separation, Jennifer and Clayton stayed with Charlie. They supported him with great compassion, trying to prevent his downfall. Jennifer wanted so much to help her father quit drinking that she overlooked his lack of will to fight. 4 years after the divorce, in 1999, Sharon met a new man, Jim Sedgwick, by chance. As Jennifer entered her teenage years, she transformed. She got rid of her braces, and contact lenses replaced her glasses, turning her into a true beauty. However, her character began to change along with her appearance. She started hanging out with kids from troubled families. Yet, thanks to her high intellect, she graduated among the top of her class. Later, Jennifer enrolled in Texas State University, majoring in finance, but quickly became disillusioned with her studies and withdrew after the first semester. She spent some time attending a community college in Austin and worked part-time at a city restaurant to support herself. During this period, she dated a guy named Mark, a decent young man from a respectable family. Their relationship could have led to marriage, but Jennifer got pulled into the nightlife. She began frequenting parties and drinking. Perhaps influenced by her father's genes and negative example, her fondness for alcohol grew. Along with drinking, marijuana entered her life. Sharon tried to influence her daughter, but to no avail. It was during one of these nights out that Jennifer met Colton Petoniak, the tragic end of Jennifer Cave. Jennifer Cave's life was tragically cut short by a gunshot wound to her right arm. The bullet passed completely through her arm and into her chest, striking her heart. The injury to a vital artery led to rapid blood loss, resulting in her untimely demise. What happened to her body afterward is horrifying. Forensic experts discovered multiple stab wounds across her body, with her chest and neck suffering the most damage. In total, the assailant inflicted 18 post-mortem stab wounds. The perpetrator then decapitated her and fired a shot through her throat into her head, intending to dispose of her body discreetly. By severing her upper limbs, he placed them in a prepared bag and trash bags. Her torso was left in the bathtub, covered with a saw. Something thwarted the assailant's initial plan, forcing a change in his actions. Evidence uncovered. At the time, Jennifer Cave's body was discovered, and the police arrived. They had not yet obtained a warrant to search Colton Petoniak's apartment. Initially, the officers could do nothing but observe the victim's body and secure the area. Once they finally obtained the necessary permission, a thorough search of the apartment was conducted. They found 3.38 caliber shell casings. The firearm used was located in Petoniak's car, which was parked in the garage. A large blood-stained machete was retrieved from the dishwasher. Toxicology reports indicated the presence of alcohol, marijuana, and methamphetamine in the victim's bloodstream. In one of the rooms, there was a road atlas with pages torn out, highlighting routes in southwest Texas. This clue shed light on the apartment owner's absence. Colton Petoniak had fled. Law enforcement immediately issued a warrant for his apprehension. Who is Colton Petoniak? Colton originated from Bryant, Arkansas. He grew up as a sharp-witted boy with impressive looks, enjoying popularity among girls during his teenage years. His father ran a successful agricultural business that flourished year after year, allowing the family to live comfortably. However, this abundance spoiled Colton. On one hand, he was ambitious and goal-oriented. On the other, he could become aggressive and hot-tempered. Colton was passionate about skateboarding and played the guitar. He attended a Catholic boys' middle school in Little Rock, where he excelled academically and frequently made the honor roll. He was also a National Merit Scholarship finalist. In 2000, Petoniak was one of 7 senior finalists at his school and among 166 in the state. By his senior year, he began to encounter problems with alcohol and fights, largely because he was part of a group of local affluent kids who led a leisurely lifestyle, often throwing parties with all the ensuing consequences. Nonetheless, thanks to high graduation scores, he easily got admitted to the University of Texas at Austin. Rather than focusing on his studies, he continued his wayward lifestyle, losing friends and gaining a reputation as a frequent drinker and marijuana user. He could have had a bright future if not for his penchant for self-destruction. After being expelled from a university fraternity, he began distributing controlled substances. His parents fought to curb his addiction, even taking him back home. A fateful meeting. In the spring of 2004, Jennifer and Colton met at a party. They were instantly drawn to each other. Jennifer, who often idealizes people, decided to give a potentially dangerous relationship a chance rather than run from it. Their friendship gradually grew into love. Over time, Jennifer began using illegal drugs with Colton. His luxurious apartment gradually turned into a den of excess, and using illegal substances together became a household rule. As a result, Jennifer's addiction only got worse. Parents repeatedly tried to tear her away from these addictions. They even gave her a car, hoping to encourage her to be home more often. However, each time she returned, her promises quickly faded. Colton's condition worsened. He became increasingly paranoid and began carrying a gun and knife in an attempt to mimic the image of a gangster. In 2004, Petoniak was arrested for possession of illegal substances. He even went through a rehabilitation program once, but Colton showed no sincere desire to fight his addiction. Separation. One day, Jennifer's parents decided to visit her. However, the visit brought disappointment. Jennifer had not kept her promises, had lost a significant amount of weight, and looked generally unwell. Her family suggested she undergo treatment at a rehabilitation center, to which she flatly refused. Upset, Sharon and Jim cut off her financial support, believing this tough love approach would encourage her to take control of her life. But left without money, Jennifer found no better option than to move in with Colton. What happened in his apartment is hard to say, but after living with him for a month, Jennifer decided to leave. A friend offered her a room and support. Miss Cave shared her fears. She no longer felt safe with Colton but did not delve into details. Something clearly frightened her as she refused to reconcile with her ex. One day he came to her, asking her to come back. Jennifer remained firm, especially when she saw the knife Colton brought with him. She asked Colton to calm down and suggested they remain friends. Surprisingly, he agreed. Contact with him was minimized, and moreover, she began reconnecting with her parents. Finally, her life seemed to be getting back on track. In early 2005, Jennifer started a new relationship with a guy named Scott, a single father who appeared quite decent. His lifestyle was the polar opposite of Colton's. Scott worked as a waiter at a restaurant, played keyboards in a band, and was a good singer, all while leading a sober life. In turn, Jennifer began to feel better about herself, even looking healthier by his side. She took on the role of a homemaker and became a mother figure to his daughter. However, she was still liable to leave at a moment's notice if Colton called. The arrival of Laura Hall. Eventually, Colton moved to a new apartment complex with a pool named Orange Tree close to the university, making it a hot spot for daily parties. His behavior continued to be erratic, with some friends reporting they had seen him engaging in Russian roulette by himself. It was during one of these phases that he met Laura Ashley Hall. She was a frequent attendee of these parties and became infatuated with him, exhibiting jealousy towards any female in Colton's circle, especially Jennifer. Laura was perceived in various ways by their peers, most commonly described as arrogant and capable of putting anyone in their place. Laura, like Colton, came from a well-off family. Miss Hall was athletic, participating in various competitions, and she was academically successful, showing great promise. After high school, she enrolled in university but soon dropped out, opting for a job and a leisurely lifestyle instead. Before long, Colton and Laura started dating. Like Jennifer, she was deeply drawn to him. When he was sentenced to 60 days in jail in June 2005, Laura sent him all her earnings, even going into debt. Friends noted that she changed for the worse, becoming bold, neglecting her job and her personal care. Many believed she had also started using banned drugs. Unlike with Jennifer, Colton disregarded her feelings, even to the extent of extinguishing cigarettes on her. A new chapter begins, ends. During this time, Jennifer ended her relationship with Scott. She felt unworthy of his family and did not want to cause them any trouble. Jennifer occasionally communicated with Colton, who was still infatuated with her. However, she did not rekindle their previous relationship, keeping their interactions strictly platonic. All Jennifer desired was to secure a job and return to college. In August, a promising opportunity arose in her life. She began a new relationship with Michael Rodriguez and, most importantly, found an excellent job. After several days of training at a law firm, she performed so impressively that she was offered a consultant position with a respectable salary. Jennifer was proud of herself and truly happy. On August 16th, she decided to celebrate the start of her new life with friends. That evening, they went to a bar and then headed to a club. According to a friend, the bouncer didn't let Colton in because of his appearance. This might have led him to seek out controlled substances. The investigation continues. In an effort to shed light on the events of that fateful night, investigators interviewed Colton's neighbors. They managed to uncover intriguing information. Around 3 a.m. on August 17th, Nora Sullivan heard a knock at her door. Opening it, she saw Colton standing there looking suspicious with blood on him and a pistol visible at his waist. Startled, she inquired what had happened. Colton told her he had gotten into a shootout with some individuals. Nora didn't hear any gunshots and thought he was lying as usual. She closed the door and peeked through the peephole to see him eventually walk away. None of the neighbors interviewed heard any gunshots that night either. Detectives also discovered that Colton had been in contact with Laura twice that night. The morning of August 17th, he visited a hardware store where he purchased a saw, several masks, and gloves, as well as a significant amount of cleaning supplies. Using these, he dismembered Jennifer's body and planned to clean the apartment to erase any evidence of the crime. It's possible that the unexpected arrival of Sharon and Jim startled him and prompted his flight. Apprehension. A critical discovery in Colton's apartment led investigators directly to his trail. Colton, along with Laura Hall, was found in Mexico. They had crossed the border in Laura's car. Local authorities distributed Colton's photo nationwide. During this time, the couple enjoyed themselves, visiting cinemas and restaurants. They stayed in a hotel in the border town of Piedras Negras, where an employee recognized Colton as the sought-after individual. The employee took his photo and sent it to the police. Mexican law enforcement apprehended the duo and transported them to the border, where U.S. officials arrested Petoniak. Laura Hall was released. Before her release, Laura caused a scene with the Border Patrol, loudly protesting Colton's innocence and obstructing the arrest process. Later, she admitted that their trip to Mexico was the best experience she'd ever had. In total, they spent about 5 days abroad. Trial. On August 23, 2005, Colton Petoniak was charged with a crime against Jennifer Cave. A month later, Laura Hall was arrested and charged with tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. The prosecution presented evidence found in the apartment, including a videotape from the store and a receipt listing items purchased. Colton said he did not remember anything about the night of August 16th, 17, attributing his amnesia to heavy drinking and the use of illegal drugs. Initially, he did not deny hurting Jennifer, but insisted he did not remember anything. He claimed that he woke up and discovered his ex-girlfriend's body in the bathroom. After discovering the body, he contacted Laura, who advised him to buy a saw and cleaning supplies. She helped dismember the victim and hide the body parts in bags. The prosecution argued that she was responsible for Jennifer's post-mortem injuries. Colton later hinted that Hall may have been motivated by jealousy, suggesting her involvement in an act of revenge against her rival. However, both defendants pleaded not guilty. Nevertheless, the evidence of his involvement was overwhelming. First, Jennifer's body was found in Colton's apartment. His fingerprints and DNA were found on the machete, saw, and firearm found at the crime scene, and the weapon in his car was identified as the crime weapon. In addition, he was the one who purchased the cleaning supplies from the store. The jury had no doubt of his guilt. On January 29, 2007, Colton Petoniak was sentenced to 55 years in prison with parole eligibility after serving at least half of his sentence. His earliest release date will not occur until 2060. The case against Laura Hall proved complex. The prosecution suggested she could have acted out of blind affection for Colton. Laura's DNA was found on one of the victim's shoes, a store towel, and even the firearm used. The defense argued this only proved her involvement in disposing of the body, not in the initial act. They couldn't prove she was the one who fired the first shot, attributed to Jennifer's head post-mortem. No evidence placed her at the scene at the time of the crime. Laura insisted she only learned of the crime when Colton told her and claimed he forced her to flee to Mexico with him. However, witnesses from their time in Mexico reported the couple seemed to enjoy their trip. In 2007, Laura Hall was found guilty of obstructing justice and tampering with evidence, receiving a 6-year prison sentence. A subsequent trial in 2010 resulted in the maximum sentence of 11 years and a $14,000 fine. Laura was paroled on March 15, 2018, with GPS monitoring, completing her sentence in August of the same year. Her whereabouts thereafter remain unknown. Was Colton framed? Colton Petoniak remains incarcerated. He has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been unsuccessful. In these appeals, he consistently stated that he has no memory of the tragic night's events. However, he revealed that there are witnesses who claim Laura confessed to Jennifer's demise. He alleges that during the trial, the prosecutors were aware of this information but failed to disclose it to his defense team, suggesting a possible setup. Although Petoniak's legal motions were denied, this revelation raised questions among the public. Moreover, Jennifer's parents believe that Laura's punishment was insufficient. They are convinced that she played a more significant role than she admits. Unlike Colton, Hall has never expressed remorse or regret for Jennifer's death. She referred to Jennifer only as that girl or the dead girl, sometimes even using derogatory terms. To this day, the exact events of that fateful night remain unknown. Only Jennifer knows the truth that the walls of Petoniak's residence silently conceal. Sadly, the dead cannot speak. Jennifer's life was cut short in her prime. Regrettably, she realized too late an essential truth. Staying away from certain individuals and ceasing communication with them could mean saving oneself. Today we are going to visit India. India is the only country in the world where cultural and religious traditions have not been interrupted since ancient times, which is probably why it attracts tourists from all over the planet. But in our story, we will look at India like a coin that has a different image on each side. On April 20th, 2018 at dawn, 2 young men went fishing down the river toward a mangrove forest. They took a long boat ride downstream until they reached a remote and quiet place. One of them jumped into the water to tie up the boat, but his attention was distracted by a pungent, acrid odor that was very close by. They went ashore and followed the odor. Curiosity led them to a horrifying find. There was something that looked like a human body hanging on a tree branch and a skull lying nearby. The guys abandoned the boat and rushed to the nearest village to report the terrible find. A team of investigators, forensic experts, and police officers urgently arrived on the spot. The experts confirmed that the suspended body was indeed human. It was obvious that it had been hanging for a long time and had already begun to decompose. The flesh on the arms and legs had torn off. The skull was found nearby. Next to the body were packs of cigarettes, packaged drinking water, and a lighter, which probably belonged to the victim. An investigation was conducted at the scene the same morning. The evidence found was seized, and the remains were sent for examination. The modest remnants of clothing that could be identified on the victim were identified. Liga Scromane, a 33-year-old hiker, was the victim of an accident. But who is Liga Scromane, and what happened to her on the riverbank? Liga Scromane was born in Latvia in 1986. She grew up in a large and friendly family, had an older brother and a younger sister. The sisters were very friendly, and from childhood shared all joys and hardships with each other. Growing up, Liga moved to Ireland, but always maintained close relations with her family. It was in Ireland that she met Andrew Jordan. It was not love at first sight, as the modest Liga had difficulty in communicating with new people. But after 5 years, Liga and Andrew turned into a married couple who made great plans for the future. And despite the fact that Liga worked in a hotel and led a modest lifestyle, she dreamed of opening her own center of yogic retreats in Portugal. Andrew supported his beloved's idea, and together they saved money for 4 years to fulfill their dream. But fate had other plans. In early 2018, Liga was experiencing the effects of an aggravated skin disease that was causing physical and mental discomfort. To help her sister overcome this ailment and restore her emotional state, her sister Ilse invited Liga on a trip. So in February 2018, Liga and Ilse traveled to Trivandrum, the capital of Kerala, so that Liga could receive Ayurvedic treatment for depression. Kovalam is the premier Ayurvedic resort of Kerala in India. Kovalam, which means grove of coconut palms in Hindi, is a small village offering everything you need for a comfortable and complete rest and treatment. Ayurveda is the oldest system of medical knowledge, which originated more than 5,000 years ago. Ayurveda is based on the universal laws of nature, on the unity of all things in this world. Ayurvedic programs help a person to restore balance and harmony in the body. Panchakarma is the best Ayurvedic program for modern man in Kerala. Panchakarma helps to reboot the body effectively. Most of those who have undergone the Panchakarma course in Kerala repeat it annually, and it is not without reason, as regular Panchakarma not only allows us to get rid of extra pounds, but also adds a couple of decades of healthy life. Since 1985, Ayurveda has been recognized by the World Health Organization as the most effective system of alternative medicine in the world. Let us emphasize that all the promised benefits of Ayurveda are only an alternative, not a panacea for healthy longevity. The 33-year-old Liga and her sister came to Kerala in search of spiritual enlightenment, hoping to be cured of depression in one of the Ayurveda centers. Their treatment tour was scheduled for 6 weeks and included yoga classes, meditation, therapeutic herbal drinks, and nutritional and massage recommendations. The sisters were treated together at an Ayurvedic clinic at Kovalam in Kerala and have already completed their course. On the morning of March 14th, Liga refused to go to yoga class with her sister, explaining that she had a headache. When Ilse returned to her room, Liga was not there. With the help of the hotel staff, Ilse was able to find out that her sister left the hotel around 11:30 a.m. wearing leggings and a yoga t-shirt, hired an auto rickshaw, and went to Kovalam Beach for a walk. The beaches around Kovalam are popular destinations for both domestic and international travelers. The sandy beaches of Kovalam are always crowded. However, Liga could not be found there. Ilse wandered the beach until late at night showing her sister's picture, but never heard the long-awaited response that someone had seen her. This was actually strange, as Liga was a tall white girl who definitely stood out, and if she was actually on the beach, someone should have seen her. After searching unsuccessfully, Ilse went to the police station to report her sister missing. However, the Indian police officers did not show any sympathy for the missing foreign tourist, but on the contrary, complacently asserted that they would surely find the girl who had strayed, or she would surely return the next day. They were not even deterred by the fact that Liga, according to her sister, had psychological problems and could be an easy target for criminals. The Potencod police registered a case, but the investigation started coldly, or rather it is more correct to say did not start at all. Liga Scromane had traveled extensively in Kerala. She had been to Kollam, Varkala, and finally came to Kovalam. She considered herself a very experienced traveler in India, and this time she took her sister with her to show her the India she loved so much. But the trip turned tragic. After a few days of inaction by the Indian police, Ilse started searching on her own. She enlisted the help of friends and also reported Liga missing to her husband. Andrew flew urgently to India. The police investigation intensified after the missing person's husband. Andrew, Jordan, and Ilse contacted the local press and started an online campaign to find her. Ilse also reached out via Twitter to India's Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj. "Please help! My sister, a Latvian citizen, has been missing for 8 days. We are very worried," she wrote. The desperate sister announced a reward of 100,000 rupees to anyone who could help find Liga or provide any information about her movements that day. Ilse and her friend Alexa, who had also traveled to India after hearing about Liga's disappearance, put up posters in the Kovalam beach area where Liga was last seen. Together, they put up flyers and distributed them to people. Numerous locals took an active part in the search for the missing tourist. The important fact remained that Liga suffered from depression and had a hard time interacting with strangers. On the day of her disappearance, she hired an auto rickshaw to reach the beach and was never seen again. She had about 1,000 rupees with her but no passport, so she could not leave the country. Ashok Kumar, head of the local police station, said that the police had no leads in the case. The police kept saying that the tourist had gone on a bender or eloped and would soon return on her own. However, regular, persistent requests for help from Ilse and Andrew forced the police to search for Liga. The search operation was conducted in the Kovalam beach area where Liga Scromane was last seen. Police assumed that she had drowned, just as the unidentified body of a woman was found washed ashore at Kula Chal in Kanyakumari district. Investigators examined the body along with the missing woman's sister, but the latter did not identify it as her sister. The version of drowning was not confirmed, and the search for Liga continued. Andrew, on the other hand, was convinced that his wife had been kidnapped by local gangs for the purpose of selling her. He tried to infiltrate these gangs to get more information, but was exposed and warned that repeated contact with the gangs would result in him having to leave the country. A month after Liga went missing, there are still no leads to help find the girl. Ilse continued to look for her sister. She visited Kovalam Beach every day and watched people. On one such day, she spotted a boat and she had a theory. The only way to leave the beach unnoticed was the boat. On April 17, 2018, after a forced hiatus, Andrew returned to India to continue his search. Ilse and Andrew entered a new struggle to find the Scromane League, but the body was still not found. The search was complicated by the fact that Liga Scromane was a tourist and a citizen of another country. The Latvian Foreign Ministry said the embassy was in constant contact with Liga's relatives and was also working closely with the Indian police. The Latvian embassy also appealed to the Indian Foreign Ministry with a request for special support in the search for Liga, as well as the honorary consul of Latvia in India, whose consular district includes the region where Liga disappeared. At the request of the Kerala state government, the Indian Navy and Air Force will search for missing Latvian citizen Liga Scromane. The search operation involved an M-32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boats, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. But even this search operation did not bring the desired result, and Liga was still not found. The search continued. By this time, all local residents knew about the missing tourist from Latvia. They supported and sympathized with Andrew and Ilse. On April 20th, 2018, Ilse's phone received the longest-awaited yet most horrific call of her life. A body had been found in the mangrove jungle. She and Andrew drove to the designated spot where the police were waiting for them for the boat crossing. Ilse's heart was pounding like never before. She felt that for the moment, she would have to swim the path that the League had traveled to its demise. On the spot, horror overwhelmed her. Ilse saw her sister's clothes. The shirt and leggings on the body were recognized by Ilse, but the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liga. It remained unclear how, with whom, and why Liga had gotten to a place that could only be accessed by going through Panatura from Samudra Beach. 2 women confirmed that they had witnessed Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But why would a girl who is being treated for depression and is already alone take a boat to a remote place in the forest? The body was shifted to the Medical College Hospital where it underwent an autopsy, which was captured on video camera. The police said they could not confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was completed. According to the city police commissioner, the body was badly mutilated, with a head lying nearby. Police have tentatively identified the dead woman as missing tourist Liga Scromane. In favor of the investigators' conclusions is also the fact that the victim was identified by Liga's relatives by her hair and clothes. One of the versions of rescue services in India was poisoning. There are poisonous pong trees in the mangrove forest, and she could have accidentally or intentionally eaten their fruit and poisoned herself. Between 1989 and 1999, More than 500 people died from poisoning by its fruits in Kerala alone. It looked like another nonsense, because the person was hanging upside down, but there was no head. It is obvious that if Liga was poisoned, her body would have been in a completely different position, and the head would have been in place. The Indian authorities were talking utter nonsense. Based on the information about Liga's complex psychological problem, the investigators also assumed the version that Liga had voluntarily left her life. Ilse feared that the police would try to pass off her sister's murder as a voluntary departure from life. Although a rope had been found at the scene, and it could be concluded that the hiker had hanged herself, Ilse demanded a separate explanation for the missing head. "Don't tell me it's lost," Ilse said sarcastically in yet another appeal on the internet. Breathlessly, Ilse and the anxious public waited for the results of the forensic tests. The forensic results were overwhelming. The forensic report stated that there were areas of blood pooling in part of Liga Scromane's brain, as well as bruising in the neck area. The autopsy revealed that the woman had been strangled by several people. She was killed in an attempted violent attack. There were external injuries on the body, probably sustained during the struggle. The fact of violence could not be confirmed as the body was in the decomposition stage. There were characteristic injuries on the cartilage in her throat, which indicated that someone had squeezed her throat with force. The trauma was severe enough to be fatal. According to forensic experts, there were blood clots in her brain which confirmed strangulation. They also noted that there were bruises on her neck and legs. A total of 9 wounds were recorded on Liga Scromane's body. In view of the above, the police no longer considered the version of voluntary death. According to the autopsy, it was determined that Liga was murdered. Liga died after resisting or struggling. Ilse breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that the police would soon find her sister's killers. But there were complications as well. As part of the investigation, the police began checking out local drug dealers and card players. In addition, during interviews with local residents, 2 women said that they saw Liga walking alone to the place where her body was later found, but the police said they did not fully trust their words. Meanwhile, Liga's relatives have accused Indian police of incompetence, claiming that if the girl had been searched for immediately, the tragedy could have been avoided. The 33-year-old Latvian tourist is believed to have been grabbed from a nearby beach and transported by boat before being strangled. A special team of investigators has begun looking for those responsible for the crime. About 40 suspects were interviewed. However, arrests were planned to be made a few days later after the law enforcers had enough evidence. The Indian police conducted an investigation that led to the arrest of 2 men who were eventually accused of killing Liga Scromane. Police revealed that Liga Scromane was lured by 2 men who then abused her before dismembering her body. The alleged assailants, who are now in custody, are local dealers in illegal substances. The suspects fully confessed under torture. Both the accused were pimps and were also dealing in illegal substances. Police said the autopsy did not reveal much evidence because Lig's body was badly decomposed. Andrew Jordan filed a petition in Superior Court calling for a review of the felony murder case. He believed that more people were involved in the woman's murder. In the petition, he pointed out that both defendants later recanted their pleas of guilty to the crime. According to Jordan, the men may have confessed because they were tortured, which, as it turns out, is a common practice in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied the murdered woman's common-law husband, Liga Scromane, a review of the case. Due to lack of direct evidence, the trial was postponed for 2 months. But Andrew was outraged by this attitude of the authorities. He had earlier accused the Kerala authorities and police of incompetence and attempts to cover up Leia's murder so as not to scare away tourists. Both the suspects' lawyers asked for and got a postponement. By law, they have the right to postpone the case once without giving any reason. The more they postponed, the more he was convinced the case was unclean. However, both suspects were in custody. Investigation revealed that 32-year-old Umesh and 28-year-old Udayakumar offered Liga Scromane weed, and when she was drugged, they used it and then strangled and decapitated her. It is noted that the two men apprehended for the murder of Liga Scromane and had previously committed similar crimes on numerous occasions. Both of them worked for a food delivery company in the Kerala capital and earned money as illegal tour guides in their spare time. Umesh and Udayan had been charged with destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The place where Liga's corpse was found and had earlier served as a pleasure ground for Umesh. He used to take men there. 13 criminal cases had been filed against him, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of Umesh's victims have testified against him. Liga Scromane, along with both men, were seen in the area by several people. They were initially silent, but confessed to everything after the body was found. The detainees confessed to police that they'd committed the murder while attempting violence. They were apprehended, but had previously claimed that they had only seen Liga Scromane in Kovalam. The men pleaded guilty after repeated interrogations. On December 6, 2022, the court finally sentenced both men to life in prison. The court also recognized that the criminals must pay compensation to Liga Scromane's sister Ilsa, 165,000 rupees each. We would like to note that there has been a whole series of such crimes in this country recently. Young girls are regularly subjected to violence. The problem of crime in India is very acute. Due to the huge number of sexual acts against minors, the government has introduced the death penalty. It is also worth noting that if the relatives, and primarily Liga's sister, had not been persistent, had they not involved the press by organizing a press conference and an influential MP, it is obvious that the local police would hardly have seriously investigated the case. For at first a theory was put forward that the League had allegedly passed away voluntarily, and as it now turns out, this is not the first incident in this very place where Liga was found. After this story, I would like to warn once again all women who are frivolous about the dangers of traveling alone in India. Do not seek spiritual enlightenment in distant, dangerous, and uncharted countries. Take care of yourself. Mom is a special person in the life of each of us. In all languages, this word sounds affectionate and tender because it carries only goodness and understanding. Mommy is the only word a person shouts in moments of pain, fear, or joy. But unfortunately, children are not always the most important thing in a mother's life. A high-profile crime that took place in 2016 in one of the largest states in the United States, Texas, has progressed throughout the country. A young and successful 42-year-old woman, Christy Sheets, shot and killed her 2 adult daughters in the backyard of her home. But why? Let's start at the beginning and try to figure out what led a loving mother to such a cruel act. Christy Bird was born in the city of Decatur, Alabama in 1974 in the family of Rebecca Bird. The girl's parents separated when she was very young. Mom Christy had to work hard to provide a poverty-free existence for her child. The main role in the upbringing of Christy took her grandfather. The girl adored her grandfather because he pampered her and taught her unusual things, such as how to hold a gun. The retired officer had an impressive collection of weapons. The two of them would lock themselves in a semi-basement dark room where they would spend hours looking at the treasures under her grandfather's fascinating stories. From early childhood, a person tries to find out his place in life, learns to build relationships with others, receives education for further application of the knowledge gained in real life. But Christy did not strive for knowledge. Although she studied in one of the best schools in the state, the study was not interested in the young rebel. Constant clashes with peers severely traumatized her childhood psyche. As a result of regular attacks and difficulties with classmates, Christy barely finishes school. After school, Christy moves to the northern part of Alabama in Lawrence County to attend university. Here, she takes a job as a secretary at a transportation company where she meets Jason Sheets, a young and promising specialist. The young people spend hours walking around the city. They hike together. They go on vacation to Christy's hometown. A strong and long-lasting relationship develops between them. After a few years, they get married and move to Kathy's town. On one of the quietest streets of the city, The young family buys a house. On April 19, 1994, their first daughter Taylor was born. Jason was happy because he had always dreamed of a little daughter. The Sheets family was quite well-to-do and happy. Jason worked successfully in a large oil and gas company as an IT consultant. Christy raised her daughter and was an exemplary housewife. On October 21, 1998, Christy and Jason had a second daughter who was named Madison. Family life went on in a calm and measured way. Jason was working. Christy was taking care of the children. Until tragedy struck, which once and for all changed the former way of life of the family. In 2012, Christy's grandfather died. She loved him like the father she never had. The woman had a very hard time experiencing such a great loss. The family idol was replaced by psychologists and antidepressants. But just 2 months later, still not recovered from the loss of her grandfather, Christy's mother dies. Another tragedy morally kills the woman, and she gets into a clinic with a mental disorder for the first time. One clinic is replaced by another. Antidepressants are replaced by hard alcohol. Christy's internal state remains very unstable and vulnerable for a long time. Husband and daughters for a long time in every possible way try to support a dear and beloved person. After a while, they seem to succeed. Christy returns to her old life. She gets a job as a manager in a laser cosmetology clinic where they specialize in the removal of tattoos. Work takes up all her time, while her beloved husband and daughters try to occupy her heart and thoughts. On September 25, 2015, the day of her daughters, Christy posts a picture of Taylor and Madison on her Facebook page. She captions it with a declaration of motherly love. Christy called her children amazing, sweet, kind, beautiful, and smart girls. "You have no idea how much I love and cherish you," Christy wrote at the time, addressing her daughters. In January of that year, she published another strong post, already in defense of her right to bear arms. A post whose photo showed a polished gun on a table and 7 bullets next to it. "I have 10 guns. Obama wants 8 of my guns. How many guns do I have?" Responding to the comments, she writes, "That's right, I have 10 guns." Christy Sheets has been a vocal supporter of legislation to make firearms widely available to the public. In particular, she was against the Democratic Party's initiative to ban the free trade of semi-automatic handguns. Christy claimed it would violate her family's right to defend themselves. How ironic that in the end, Christy Sheets' love and admiration for and staunch defense of guns, and her belief in the right to bear arms, led to the tragic loss of her 2 daughters and her own life. On June 24, 2016, Jason's birthday, Christy called her daughters over for a family dinner. That night, the entire family gathered in the living room. But instead of a celebratory dinner, Jason wanted to inform his daughters of his impending divorce. Christy overheard their conversation. An uproar broke out in the living room. She was yelling. She cursed. Then she left. Jason tried to calm the girls down, promised things would get better. But Christy came back with a gun in her hand. Jason covered the children. Screaming and panic took over the house. Madison hid behind the couch and discreetly called emergency services. When the dispatcher answered, the girl was overtaken by her mother. Mommy, don't shoot, don't shoot." Wheezing, moaning, silence, a voice was heard again. "Don't shoot, there are children. I'll do what you want, don't shoot." The call was interrupted. In the second call, made by 22-year-old Taylor, she is unable to speak or relay information to the dispatcher. She was completely stumped by the incredible chaos that was unfolding in the family home. Taylor was shot twice by her mother, who fired the fatal shot as her daughter was dying on the ground outside the family home. Holding a gun, Christy simply fired it several times at Taylor and Madison. At 5 p.m., police arrived at the scene of the tragedy after several 911 calls. Near Christy and Jason's home, police officers saw the bodies of 17-year-old Madison Sheets and 22-year-old Taylor Sheets on the ground. Christy was standing over Madison's body with a gun in her hand. She was clearly about to fire another shot at the girl. The police officer, not knowing if the victim was alive, ordered her to drop the weapon immediately. Christy ignored this demand, at which point the officers opened fire at point-blank range. The woman was killed at the scene. An examination of the victims revealed that 17-year-old Madison died instantly from her injuries, and 22-year-old Taylor was wounded. She was flown by helicopter to the hospital, but unfortunately, her life could not be saved. So for both daughters, the injuries inflicted by their own mother proved fatal. The only survivor of the massacre was 45-year-old Jason Sheets. Christie shot him too, but he managed to take refuge in the house of neighbors, who asked him to call the police. The neighbors heard him pleading with Christie, "Don't hurt them, they're our kids." But Christie didn't heed those words. Instead, she fired a couple of bullets in Jason's direction. Only a lucky break saved him from death. However, the police were not immediately able to question Jason about the reasons for the incident. When the police arrived at the scene, they immediately sent him to the hospital in a state of deep shock. The area near the house where the family tragedy played out was cordoned off. Shocked neighbors and random witnesses were repeatedly questioned. As interviews began, it was most accurately established that at first there were sounds of bickering coming from the house. Then, according to witnesses concerned about what was happening, Christie began beating the girls. Then, taking a .38 caliber shotgun, she shot Madison and then Taylor at point-blank range. The girls, bleeding, ran out of the house. Madison managed to take only a few steps before falling to the ground and collapsing in agony. Seeing this, the mother fired another shot in Taylor's direction. She fell, and Christie went inside the house and cold-bloodedly reloaded the shotgun and finished her off with a point-blank shot. Witnesses said Christie acted in cold blood and without emotion. After the first shots rang out back in the living room of the home, all family members ran outside. It was a family argument that escalated into a shooting, but we're still trying to piece everything together. That was the first version of what happened, voiced for the TV news crews that arrived at the scene of the tragedy. What drove 42-year-old Christie Bird Sheets to commit this unthinkably brutal crime? The detectives don't know the exact reasons. All they have at their disposal are dry facts. So, police say, in the house of the family Sheets, not all was not well. Over several years, because of conflicts between family members, to Sheets more than a dozen times called the police patrol. In the end, Christie's husband and father of both girls, 45-year-old Jason Sheets, could not stand it and left his wife. But he did return to her recently. On the day of the tragedy, the entire family gathered for dinner at Christie's invitation. Even Taylor, a college student after a recent fight with her mother, came home to celebrate Jason's birthday with her family. Shocked observers and acquaintances of the family were shocked by what happened. How and why did a mother kill her own daughters? Neighbor Gino Hernandez recalls the Sheets family. "I knew both girls since they were 10 years old," the man said, wiping away tears. "They were always nice, outgoing girls. Always waved and said hello when they walked by. The other thing is Christie. She wouldn't even stop by the barbecue. It was always like she was on her own." "Wonderful girls, and Jason's a good guy too," another neighbor asserted. Their problems were all about Christie. The investigation also agrees with the neighbors. It has already been revealed that Christie had conflicts with both daughters before. Also, official authorities have already reported that Christie suffered from mental illness. On June 29, 2016, at the first press conference, Sheriff Troy Niels told reporters that the 42-year-old mother was depressed and had made repeated attempts to take her own life because she was on the verge of divorcing her husband. According to the police spokesman, the couple's marriage began to crumble back in 2012. Just then, the grandfather who raised Christie Sheets died. To kill family members, Mrs. Sheets used a gun, which she inherited from a deceased relative. Also, one of the possible reasons for the serious discord in the family, the sheriff called Christie's unwillingness to put up with the upcoming marriage of her eldest daughter, Taylor. A few days before the shots were fired, Christie Sheets had an argument with her oldest daughter where she attempted to apply house arrest to Taylor and forbid her from seeing her fiancé. Jason did not agree with his wife that house arrest was an appropriate punishment for a 22-year-old girl, noted Nels. Juan Sebastian Logo, 23, and Taylor Sheets, 22, were in the same year of college in the art department. The young people had been dating for 4 years. On social media, they showed how in love they were and how they were preparing for their upcoming wedding. A small wedding ceremony was planned for June 27th. It has been suggested that the mother may have objected to the marriage of Taylor and Sebastian, who was of Hispanic descent. Disagreeing with his wife, Jason Sheets insisted that incarcerating their eldest daughter was inappropriate punishment for an adult. Later, Jason Sheets would still testify, telling investigators that his wife had called their daughters to inform them of the divorce. She had been notified of it, but instead of explaining in front of the children, she pointed a gun at them and shot them several times. But she did not shoot her husband. As Mr. Sheets stated, the wife's motive was that she wanted to make him suffer. According to Jason Sheets, his wife's downward spiral began in 2012 after she lost her grandfather and then lost her mother just 2 months later. Apparently, the gun she used to kill her daughters was a gift from her grandfather. Jason Sheets revealed that his wife applied for a license to carry a gun, but was denied because of her mental illness. This begs the question, what did Christy Sheets think could have triggered the need to punish her husband and make him suffer? Was it the breakdown of their marriage, the feeling that control and valor in her life had been lost, hinted at in a cluster of Facebook rants where Christy talked about protecting herself and her family? Or could Christy Sheets' decision to kill her daughters have been driven in some way by medication or the continued deterioration of her mental state? Jason Sheets told police that his wife suffered from depression. She was taking prescribed pills by the handful and seeing a therapist. She had been treated 3 times in recent years after attempting to leave her life at a private psychiatric hospital, Sheriff Nels reported. Christy Sheets had ample time and opportunity to kill her husband, but she didn't. Jason realized that Christy wanted him to suffer, Sheriff Nels said, echoing Jason Sheets, recounting the details of the incident for the first time. Mr. Sheets revealed that Christy knew about how much he loved Taylor and Madison and how much they loved him, Nels continued. Perhaps the complete rift in the family and the realization that she was losing not only her husband but her daughters as well exacerbated Christy's already difficult emotional state, and she grabbed a gun, foreshadowing her tragic end as well. Madison Davey, a close family friend, gave a great interview in which he spoke about the relationships within the family. He was the best dad in the world. I used to hang out with them, and he loved being around us. They were so funny together. You'd think the sisters would fight, but no, Davey said. They loved each other very much and were always laughing. Davey went on to say that both daughters had a very close relationship with each other and with their father. Jason would do anything to protect them, and he tried to do that, but Christy was going to kill that day, Davey said. In one attempt to take her own life, Christy, perhaps only intimidating, pulled out a gun and said goodbye to her family with screams and tears. But she didn't get the desired effect. Jason replied indifferently, "If you want to just shoot yourself, don't touch us. Just shoot yourself." But Christy replied, "No, that will be your punishment." Relatives, friends, and acquaintances were sure that something was bound to happen in this family, but no one could think that a woman would kill her daughters. Christy was bringing harm to her family. She was mentally unstable. The sheriff's department explained that police officers were repeatedly called to the home of Christy and Jason, who were having violent arguments. Since January 2012, police have received 14 calls for service. 3 of them involved Christy threatening to take her own life, having previously been diagnosed with mental health issues. Juan Sebastian's inconsolable sister Maria stated that the Sheets sisters were some of the sweetest, most sensible and kind-hearted girls she had ever met. Today, Mariah found it hard to believe that not so long ago, she and Taylor were having carefree fun at a party and looking forward to her wedding day to Sebastian. "You've already become a member of our family, and that will remain the same," she addresses her friend. "You were a light in this crazy world, and we will always remember you." That day of the brutal crime, where the lives of young girls with everything ahead of them were cut short, has long stirred the public. People grieved with Jason. Older sister Taylor Sheets went to school, worked as a caregiver for Care.com, and dreamed of a long, happy life with the man she loved. Younger sister, Madison, studied at school and at the same time worked as a nanny. On the day of the funeral of the girls mourned the whole city. Social networks and TV news channels again covered this terrible event. Is it possible that the reason for such a terrible tragedy is the availability of guns? The unwillingness of the states to finally take up and address the issue of firearms sales has once again led to another tragedy. An ordinary Texas woman, Christy Sheets, shot and killed her own 2 daughters during a domestic dispute. Such cases are not surprising for the U.S. As long as Republicans and Democrats are pulling the cat by the tail, not even trying to come to a compromise, people will die. The exact causes of the conflict that led to such tragic consequences will remain unknown. However, it is enough that the police came to this house more than once because of regular conflicts. That is, it was already clear that the family was dysfunctional, but they were still left with guns. To summarize, I would like to go back to the beginning of this story. A mother is the closest and dearest person to her children, and children are the most important thing in life for a mother. The case of Christy Sheets is an exception rather than a reality. Amidst her inner heartache, her maternal instinct seems to have completely shut down and no one was able to stop her. But Christy's plan is fully realized. After the murder of his daughters, Jason Sheets will have to live with those horrible memories for the rest of his life.
Let's visit the small and picturesque town of Griffin, located in the state of Georgia, in the southeastern United States of America. Rightfully considered one of Georgia's oldest towns, Griffin was founded in 1840 and has since played a significant role in the state's history. All this influence of the past can be seen in its architecture and preserved monuments. The historical center of the town is imbued with the spirit of antiquity, where old brick buildings intertwine with modernity. Its rich history, stunning architecture, beautiful parks, and a variety of flavors make it a true gem of the South in the United States. Today, our story is full of intrigue and unexpected twists of fate, at the end of which each of you will ask yourself one question: where is the truth? Mary Catherine never thought that one careless act would lead to such terrible consequences. When the judge entered the courtroom, a special atmosphere of tension and anticipation appeared in the room. Everyone present focused and froze in anticipation of the verdict. The attorneys have done a tremendous amount of work, provided accurate arguments, and in case of an unexpected verdict, they already plan their performance and are ready for appeals and objections. The judge gives the floor to the jury, and they announce their verdict. At the end of a week-long trial and a 4-hour jury deliberation, Mary Catherine was found not guilty and acquitted on all charges. But let's return to this joyful note to the origins of the story and try to understand together what led the young woman to the defendant's bench and whether it could have been prevented. Steven Andrew Freeman was born on January 1st, 1995, in Thomaston, Georgia, to Troy and Jennifer Freeman. He and his brother Blake grew up as happy, healthy children without any problems with their parents or society. Kind and responsive, Steven had many friends. Everyone described him as an exceptionally calm and balanced person. Steven grew up in Griffin, where he later attended Spalding High School and Gordon State College to complete his education. Mary Catherine Higdon was also raised in a respectable family. Somewhat carefree, impetuous, humorous, friendly, she was drawn to creativity. She often put on mini-plays and performed them in front of her family and neighbors. Mary and Steven fell in love with each other in their senior years and have been inseparable since. The young couple had a lot of common interests. Both loved being in nature. They went hiking, fishing, and even hunting together. In 2012, Steven Freeman updated his Facebook status to say he was in a relationship and regularly posted various photos with his beloved. Mary's family was fond of her boyfriend. Steve's parents, in turn, also accepted his girlfriend as their own daughter. After graduating from school, the young people moved in together. Steven got a job as a plumber at Drain Right Gutters and Roofing Inc., and Mary Catherine worked as a teacher's assistant at St. George's Episcopal School. She also worked part-time as a salesperson at a gun store. By the summer of 2018, Steven and Mary had been living together for 7 years, but had not gotten married. On August 1st, 2018, at 10:42 p.m., emergency services received an alarm call. The caller, 24-year-old Mary Catherine Higdon, screamed hysterically into the phone that she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. She reported grabbing a Glock 43 firearm, unaware that there was a bullet in the chamber. When paramedics and police arrived at Sunnybrook Drive, the girl was in a state of shock. She knelt in front of the motionless and bloodied body of the young man lying on the bed, crying incessantly, gasping and begging the doctors to help him. "I can't lose him. I can't lose him," she cried hoarsely. Law enforcement officers struggled to pull Mary Catherine away from the victim to examine him and provide first aid. 23-year-old Steven Freeman, wounded in the chest just below the neck, was still breathing. He was immediately transported to Spalding Regional Hospital. Unfortunately, a few minutes before midnight, the young man's heart stopped. Not fully comprehending the tragedy that had occurred, and still in shock, Mary had to visit the police station to give her account of the events. She was called in for questioning, where the girl, still completely stunned, claimed that the shot was accidental. She explained that there had always been firearms in their home, and that Steven would leave a pistol on the nightstand for self-defense before going to sleep, as their house was located outside the city. On that fateful evening, she merely wanted to hand Steven the pistol, and it accidentally discharged. She had no idea the gun was loaded. Mary Catherine insisted that Steven Freeman was the love of her life. She would never harm him, especially not intentionally. Examining the scene, investigators did not rule out the possibility that the act might have been premeditated, and they had substantial arguments to support this theory. There were signs of a struggle in the kitchen, with food and dishes scattered about. Detectives Adam Trammell and Chris Wilson found Mary's story improbable and continued the investigation, examining the evidence. Mary Catherine was called in for a second interrogation, where the investigators employed pressure tactics. They yelled at the suspect, expressed disbelief in her story, and demanded the truth. It worked. Mary Catherine confessed to shooting her boyfriend in anger. She shared that they had a severe argument, and she wanted to leave him. Having recorded the conversation, the investigators had an admission of guilt, indicating a case solved with a heartfelt confession. However, a serious technical problem arose, causing most of the recording to be lost, save for interference and indistinct noises. How this happened was unexplainable, as was the reason why no one thought to make a backup copy of this crucial piece of evidence. Further investigation revealed that the pistol could not have fired accidentally, as it required a trigger pull. Moreover, for the bullet to hit Steven as it did, the pistol had to be pointed at the victim. Detectives also questioned Mary's behavior. Some suspected she was overacting, demonstrating her distress in an exaggerated manner. The detectives didn't stop for a moment, piecing together their version of the tragedy with new evidence and proof. Another critical fact cast doubt on the accident and Mary Catherine's words. Investigators learned that the girl worked at a gun store, where employees undergo thorough training on handling various firearms before starting work. This meant she undoubtedly knew how to safely hand over a pistol without causing harm. The picture of an accident didn't align with the new facts that the investigation uncovered. The woman changed her statement several times. Sometimes her hysterical state interrupted the interrogation, but she reiterated time and again that it was an accident. However, in another conversation, Mary Catherine let slip to the police that at Steven's request she tossed the pistol to hand it to him, and the weapon accidentally discharged. This didn't match what she told investigators of the scene and during the first interrogation.
Back then, Mary repeatedly stated that she was simply handing Steven the pistol hand to hand, not tossing it, and that's when it accidentally fired below his neck. These changing statements worked against Mary Catherine, as she was caught lying, and every word was scrutinized for hidden intent, indicating guilt concealment. Mary was detained and remained in Spalding County Jail during the trial. She was charged with felony murder, malice murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. Lieutenant Wilson vehemently contested Mary's claim of it being an accident and tried to prove her guilt in a deliberate and meticulously planned act. A new piece of evidence in this case was common cooking grease found on the slide of the pistol. The slide also had lubricant, suggesting that at some point the magazine must have been emptied. Bullets were loaded, inserted back into the pistol and placed on a shelf. In her defense, Mary Catherine told the police that she indeed was preparing dinner for Steven that evening, the very dinner that was found scattered on the kitchen floor, explaining the presence of grease on the slide. Subsequent interrogations of the couple's relatives and friends did not provide the clarity expected in this case. Many friends claimed that this teenage love turned into a roller coaster ride for Steven and Mary until the very end. Their relationship, at times nearly ending, then reigniting with new passion, became genuinely complicated in recent years. The lovers often quarreled over emerging disagreements. Mary turned every argument into a drama. She screamed at Steven and attacked him, after which he often left the house to spend the night with friends, turning off his phone as Mary continued to call and text him. She tried to control his every move, driving Steven to frustration. The guy shared with friends that Mary, during arguments and fights, pointed the pistol at him or herself, threatening to end her life or his. Steven never reported this to the police, fearing Mary would be jailed. And this was not the only instance when Mary resorted to using a weapon. And there were plenty of weapons in their home. During an interrogation, Steven's friend Thomas Skinner shared that 2 days before the tragedy, on July 30th, 2018, Steven and Mary Catherine exchanged warm messages, wishing each other a good day. The next day, July 31st, Steven told his mother that he would not return home to that devil and stayed the night at Thomas's place. On August 1st, 2018, when Steven didn't come home to sleep, Mary sent him hundreds of messages begging him to return. That evening, she prepared dinner and waited for her beloved. From Steven's mother, she learned he was at his friend Thomas's place and went to pick him up. She encountered them on the road and, rolling down the window, shouted that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Steven replied that he was coming home. The evening, instead of a reconciliatory dinner, ended in tragedy. The police believed the case was closed as a premeditated act, driven by Mary Catherine's anger, but her defense team revealed another side to the young couple's life, known to few. On June 17, 2019, almost a year after Steven's death, his beloved Mary Catherine Higdon stood trial. Before the hearing, Mary Higdon was offered a plea deal for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole if she pled guilty. However, she refused the deal, insisting she could never harm Steven because he was the love of her life. At the initial hearings, Mary Higdon defended herself vehemently. She repeatedly claimed it was an accident and that she loved Steven Freeman. She also surprised many by accusing her boyfriend of abusive behavior towards her. She claimed he hit her twice and even forced himself on her. On the day of the tragedy, he allegedly attacked her, and she had to defend herself. It turned out the couple's relationship had been deteriorating over some time. Friends and relatives claimed Mary Higdon was furious because Steven often ignored her messages and calls. She demanded attention and pursued him, especially insistently lately. Allegedly, on the night of the act when Steven Freeman finally came home, he refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him, which became the last straw for her. She couldn't hold back and fired at him.
Prosecutor Kate Lenhard stated in court that there was physical evidence supporting that Mary Catherine shot Steven in anger after he didn't come home for dinner and ignored her calls and text messages. As physical evidence, the grease found on the pistol and the sheet taken from the mattress where Steven lay bleeding were presented. The sheet was shown as a key piece of evidence that Steven was not attacking Mary but was sitting still in one spot. Forensic experts examined the bloodstains and determined that at the moment of the shot, Steven was not moving or approaching Mary Catherine, but was calmly sitting on the bed. If he had been moving, blood would have been everywhere, not just in one corner of the sheet. This only confirmed that the accused's version was once again false. In court, faced directly with the possibility of life imprisonment and finally believing in what was happening, Mary Catherine took a risky decision to give truthful testimony in court. With tears in her eyes in front of the judge and numerous attendees, she once again portrayed Steven Freeman as a harsh and controlling tyrant, and with certain evidence, she managed to do so. The defense stuck to the self-defense narrative, presenting the argument that erupted into a scandal between Mary and Steven on the evening of the tragedy, where Mary fired at him in defense. Mary Catherine sorrowfully shared numerous stories from her life where Steven had hurt her. She confessed he had repeatedly hit her face, shaken her, and threatened punishment for any minor misconduct or disobedience. Living with Steven, I experienced all kinds of pressure imaginable: verbal insults, physical attacks, and even assault. He constantly controlled and manipulated me. He needed to know where I was, who I was with, what I was doing, how I was spending money, and even what I was eating. He drove me to despair with unreasonable jealousy. I never reported him to the police because I loved and feared him. The defense presented ample evidence to support her claims, revealing not just text messages taken from Mary's old phone, but also a correspondence that raised significant questions about who was the real tyrant and betrayer in this relationship. The text messages, dating back over a year and a half between her and Steven, not only proved the boy's harshness, but also the girl's infidelity. Some message snippets showed Steven indeed insulting Mary Catherine with harsh words and threatening her with repercussions upon his return from fishing. However, the reason for his anger was much more disdainful. Steven's friends confirmed that at that moment, he was indeed very angry with his girlfriend for being unfaithful, which Mary denied. Mary Catherine shared that Steven had forced himself on her twice, and she feared he would hurt her again on August 1st, 2018, leading her to act in self-defense. The defense called an expert and close relatives of Mary who could attest to the domestic violence. Mary's sister, Sarah Higdon, testified, affirmatively stating she saw bruises on Mary's arm 2 weeks before the shooting. She expressed regret for not photographing it and believing Mary's explanation that it happened accidentally. A tearful Mary Higdon explained to the jury that on that fateful night, she decided to break up with Steven once and for all, telling him to leave the house. Steven became angry and attacked her. In defense, she grabbed the pistol from the nightstand and accidentally fired. After Mary Catherine's emotional testimony, the prosecution and defense engaged in a fierce battle, with Steven's former friends, who had been close to Mary for years, desperately trying to idealize their deceased friend. Thomas Skinner, Steven's best friend, described the victim as a loyal and hard-working country boy, and Mary Catherine as an obsessive and possessive girlfriend who constantly controlled and stalked him. He claimed Mary Catherine and Steven's relationship had become toxic over the last few years, with her threatening to end her life whenever Steven tried to leave her, and once, after an argument, she pointed a pistol at her head in front of him. Another witness, Steven's co-worker Alicia Varela, testified that Mary Catherine obsessively called Steven throughout the day, even when he was at work. However, in Mary's supposedly truthful court testimony, where she framed the shooting as self-defense, she missed an important detail that prosecutor Kate Lenhard pointed out. Mary talked a lot about their interactions and how, after many years of perfect relations, they suddenly started to degrade and physically abuse each other. But she never mentioned the moment of supposed self-defense when she actually pulled the trigger. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard was not convinced by such an admission, noting that in cross-examination, Mary never once mentioned any harsh treatment by Steven. She repeatedly asked Mary Catherine whether a woman, being safe at home, would go after her assailant late at night to bring him back home. The answer was not convincing, and the prosecutor continued her statement, embodying that dreadful scene of the accidental shooting. Kate Lenhard picked up the pistol and recreated the moment as she saw it. According to her version, Steven came home. Then, after hearing Mary out, they argued, and he refused to have dinner. Mary, enraged, scattered the prepared food around the kitchen. Steven, trying to avoid further conflict, went to the bedroom and sat on the bed. Likely he was waiting for her to calm down, but Mary, ready for confrontation, called out to him twice without receiving a response, walked into the bedroom, and shot him in the neck, on the left side, since he hadn't turned to face her. In her closing arguments, Kate Lenhard reminded the jury of the various stories and versions that kept changing at every police interrogation and court hearing. Mary Catherine Higdon spared no details in her emotional testimony about the alleged abuse from Steven Freeman. But before handing the case over to the jury, Kate Lenhard desperately pleaded to consider this story not as a case of self-defense, but as a case of extreme manipulation. Despite the lost confession recording, the prosecution presented other evidence and counter-arguments. The forensic examination proved that Steven Freeman was sitting on the bed at the moment of the shooting. Hence, he couldn't have been attacking Mary Higdon. Mary claimed they kept the gun in the house unloaded. Detectives suspected that the pistol was indeed loaded in advance on the evening of August 1st, 2018, when Mary was preparing a roast for Steven. This was the only explanation for how grease marks not only got on part of the slide but also inside the pistol. Had Mary Catherine really loaded the pistol in advance? Colleagues, neighbors, family, friends, and acquaintances of Steven Freeman unanimously testified that he was not prone to aggression. Prosecutors also pointed out that Mary Catherine Higdon changed details of her story at least 10 times since the first interrogation, attributing such changes to fear. Mary Catherine refused a plea deal, as she could have been facing the death penalty. The wait for the verdict felt like an eternity to her. After hearing all witnesses and the accused, the case was handed over to the jury. Just 10 minutes later, the jury was ready to announce their decision. However, 2 jurors out of 10 had doubts about some aspects of the prosecution's story. They were concerned that investigators, so eager to charge Mary Catherine with premeditated action, had not fully checked crucial facts. Questions were raised about the lack of a complete investigation into Steven Freeman's phone, checking his text messages, and browsing history. The prosecution simply hadn't done this. Besides Mary's lies, no sufficient evidence was presented against her. The arguments presented by jurors Victor and Chris had an effect. The jury deliberated and returned a unanimous verdict, not guilty. A few hours later, Mary Catherine Higdon was free. After a lengthy deliberation, the 12 jurors concluded the following. On the first charge, malicious action, the defendant was found not guilty. On the second charge, serious action, the defendant was found not guilty. When the judge acquitted Mary Catherine Higdon on all charges, including intentional action, reckless action, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a weapon during the commission of a crime, many people in the courtroom were shocked. Watching the woman who took her son's life walk out of the courtroom, Jennifer Freeman could barely contain her anger towards the jurors. Everyone who supported Steven's family was also stunned by such a verdict. After the trial ended in her favor, Mary Catherine returned home to be with her family in Griffin. Since then, she has stayed out of the limelight and is almost absent from social media, likely to avoid undue attention from the media and the public. Her Instagram profile is private, and no further details about her current whereabouts are known. It's assumed that Mary Catherine has moved on from her harrowing past to live a quiet and unnoticeable life. Steven Freeman's mother dedicated a farewell post to her son on social media. Steven lived a life filled with love, joy, compassion, and loyalty. Everyone was his friend, and those who enjoyed hunting and fishing with him were his closest. He had a heart of gold and a charming southern smile. Steven showed his love for you by making you feel like you were the only person in the world, making you laugh until your stomach hurt, always smiling broadly, hugging you, and never leaving your side. These 3 simple words, "I love you," have always inspired me. So who really pulled the trigger in this story? That's a question you must answer for yourself, as all the answers in this story are evident. By analyzing and presenting the situation, it's up to everyone to decide whether Mary Catherine is guilty or if it was a tragic accident that cost a young man his life. How much do you agree with the 2 jurors who changed the course of a young woman's life, giving her a second chance? Mary Catherine likely lives a quiet life away from the spotlight now that she has managed to leave her terrible past behind.